Today with me is an amazing guest who I'm super, super excited to have here, Tom Campbell. Tom is a nuclear physicist with several decades of experience developing missile systems with the US Department of Defense and NASA. Tom is also a researcher of altered states of consciousness, whose journey began in the early 1970s when he worked closely with Bob Monroe, a famous consciousness explorer who has popularized the term out-of-body experience. Tom has been able to consolidate this research to explain the reality construct in his book trilogy, My Big Toe, where toe stands for theory of everything. This theory unifies science and philosophy, physics and metaphysics, mind and matter, purpose and meaning, the normal and the paranormal. Tom, welcome to the show. I can't tell you how excited I am to have you here.
Well, thank you, Natalie. It's my pleasure being here. Hopefully we'll have some conversation that will be interesting to your listeners.
Of course. And the reason why I'm particularly been looking forward to this conversation is because I'd like to really understand what our reality or life is all about. And this podcast has been a tool for me to inspire personal growth and inform a quest for life's meaning, my own and of those who listen to the podcast. And in doing so, I wanted to connect different ways of thinking, East and West, science and spirituality, as I kind of intuitively felt that there is a connection, that these are oftentimes the two sides of the same coin. And there is a great desire in me to dissect mystical and real and understand where this line is. And oftentimes what I used to think as mystical, it becomes real, like it was with the discoveries in quantum physics, for instance. They were counterintuitive to the frame of thinking at the time, but now it's science. Now, I assume that right now we still haven't discovered everything, and there's still a great deal of things to be discovered, which means that what seems mystical today may actually be real. And I've been reading your Big Toe trilogy, and it has absolutely blown my mind by the leap it takes to connect normal and paranormal, but also by the leap it takes to explain individual and personal growth. I know it's an extremely chunky topic, but would you be able to explain key concepts of your theory for those who aren't familiar with it at all? And then we can dig deeper into some of this.
Okay. Well, you gave me such a nice introduction that you've already told them some of what I would say in an introduction. So I will try to keep it short. It's essentially this way. I have come up with a theory of everything, and I call it a big toe. Actually, the name of the book is My Big Toe. And the reason it's a big toe is because Einstein started the acronym TOE, theory of everything, trying to combine quantum physics and relativity, because those two kind of have a philosophical difference with each other. You know, each one has what they call a fact that is completely contrary to the other. So we know that neither quantum physics nor relativity are fundamental. In other words, they don't describe everything. They both are going to have to be subsets of something bigger. And scientists have been looking for that something bigger now for about 100 years. It was the early, it was about 1922 when the double slit experiment and the kind of the birth of quantum physics took place. And as you mentioned, that's something that that experiment produced a result that was contrary to materialism. Things didn't happen the way a material world, should work. So the physicists then were very energized about, wow, we've got a whole new, way of looking at reality. And they were so excited about how it was going to be really different from here on. But physicists could not figure out a good explanation of why it worked that way. So they
counterintuitive to the normal mechanical and relativity physics, right?
Yes, it is. So they couldn't find an explanation. They couldn't find a theory. They couldn't find a description that explained why it was like that. And that's still true 100 years later. And what they're looking for, and if you talk to some older physicists, the guys in their 60s who have been around a long time, they will tell you that when we figure this out, it's going to be something so different, so outlandish, and it's probably going to come from a graduate student or somebody who hasn't been, indoctrinated yet to the beliefs we physicists have, and it will be, oh, gee, what, a totally different viewpoint of the nature of reality. And from that reason, if this new perception, or I should say this new perspective, and that's all it is, just a different perspective about how things work. If this new perspective wasn't really far out, it couldn't possibly be true.
That's
because
true.
Scientists have been working on this now for 100 years and come up empty-handed to try to find something that fits their beliefs, and they can't. So it's got to be something totally outside their beliefs.
And that's something that you've developed. Exactly that.
That is what I've developed. So it's a big toe because it not only describes the nature of reality, but it completely describes the objective world, which is what quantum mechanics and relativity do. It's a better science. It's a more general science, a more general physics. We can put it that way. It explains how those two scientists, or how those two pieces of science, quantum physics and relativity, what's that overlying thing above them, that integrates them both into something that describes our objective world. But it also completely describes the subjective world with a science, a logical approach to the subjective world. So that makes it a big toe, not just a little toe like Einstein was looking for. And I call it my big toe, not because I'm so proud of it, because I want to emphasize to people that if it's not your personal truth, then it's, I said that wrong. If it's not your personal experience, it can't possibly be your personal truth. And my big toe is just a way to start on building your own big toe. And each person has to come to an understanding of the nature of reality from their own experience. Because if it's because you read it in a book or you heard about it, well, you can believe that or disbelieve it, but either one doesn't help your basic understanding. What we really truly understand has to come through our experience. Otherwise, it's a belief, because disbelieving is just also a belief. Believing is a belief, and belief is not fundamentally yours. It's somebody else's. So it's my big toe in that I encourage everybody to go have the experiences of this larger reality of consciousness and to find out what the nature of reality is on their own.
Okay.
So that's the idea. So I was going to tell you now, what is the big idea?
Yeah,
okay,
exactly. Exactly. Before we go to the experience, which we will talk about.
Yeah, what is the big idea here? Well, the big idea is that consciousness is fundamental. Okay, now scientists mostly believe that the physical world is fundamental. That's called materialism. Materialism is also has to be deterministic. If you're a materialist, you have to also be a determinist. So this is just the opposite of that. This is saying that consciousness is fundamental and the physical world can be derived from consciousness. Now, that's a really big step, and most people say, that sounds impossible. How could you derive the physical world from consciousness? But you can. And here's the basic concept, is that consciousness is fundamental. You and I and all the other people and dogs and cats and critters and bumblebees, anything that is conscious, and I'll give a definition of that a little later, is a piece of this larger consciousness system, just a subset. Now, if you're in computer science, that would be a virtual machine running within a mainframe or a subset of a larger system. The second idea is that consciousness is an information system. That's what consciousness is. It's awareness with a choice. And awareness is awareness of what? Well, information describes what awareness is aware of. So
Mm-hmm.
consciousness is an information system. Now, that means we are not human beings. Primarily, we're consciousness. So what's this human being? What's this physical reality we're in? Well, that's a virtual reality, a computed reality.
Wow.
That is the basic idea. So our physical reality is computed on a computer, which is a subset of this consciousness system, because consciousness is an information system. And we are pieces of consciousness playing a human avatar. What does that mean? That means we as consciousness make all the choices for that avatar. The avatar does nothing, thinks nothing, does nothing unless we make those choices.
Mm-hmm.
And we've been logged into that avatar since that avatar was birthed, before that avatar was birthed, actually. And it's a piece of, well, this is a little harder to explain, but it's a piece of consciousness that is really, the choice maker for that avatar.
Mm-hmm.
So that is the idea. Now, if we look at that as the fundamental notion of reality, that we are consciousness, then we can derive physics, we can derive, a lot of philosophy, metaphysics. We can understand how paranormal things work. They're normal. And we can
Mm-hmm.
understand how we work as pieces of consciousness. What's our purpose? What's our point? Why would the conscious system build a simulation? What would be the point of that?
Mm-hmm.
And all of these things can be answered very logically and very rationally. So this is a science. It's perfectly logical. It starts with two assumptions. That's that consciousness exists and evolution exists. And we start with the very simplest piece of consciousness. You might call that a consciousness cell, just a simple piece of consciousness. And then we can see how it logically has to evolve into what we have now, this larger consciousness system, this big system of which we're a part. We can see why it has to evolve virtual realities, why physics has to be the way, why, the double slit experiment has to work the way it does, why
Mm-hmm.
relativity has to work the way it does. So both of those basic sciences can be derived from first principles once you understand the nature of reality. So that's the key idea. We are consciousness. We're not humans. We're playing a human character, and we can play other characters. And we play this human character again and again and again, not the same human character, but different human characters, because what we're trying to do is lower the entropy of our consciousness, because the whole system evolves by lowering its entropy. And we can get into that later if you wish.
And what is entropy for the listeners?
Entropy is a measure of disorder.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, so if you have an information system and it's very high entropy, that means all the bits are disordered. A bit just being a name for the smallest unit of information.
Mm-hmm.
So all the bits are random, then there is no information. But if you order some of those bits in particular ways, you create information. And those ordered bits could be a symbol of something, could mean something, could stand for something, could be part of a language, could be a number, could be all sorts of things. And then you can work with those ordered bits. So the more that the system orders its bits, the lower its entropy is, the less
Mm-hmm.
it's just random. So consciousness evolves by creating more information. And that information has to be significant, has to have meaning, has to have
Mm-hmm.
purpose to it. So we are pieces of that consciousness. So we are trying to lower the entropy of our piece of consciousness.
That
And
fits to the whole.
Yeah, because we're a piece of the whole. So
Mm-hmm.
as we lower our entropy, the whole system's entropy lowers because we're a piece of the whole. And it's a little longer logical argument, but it turns out that in a social system, lowering entropy among pieces of consciousness amounts to being caring, being kind, being helpful, sharing, being compassionate, being sensitive. That's the low entropy interaction between pieces of consciousness. And I can show this, logically. You can show it mathematically, but that is, so that boils down to, what is our purpose here? Our purpose here is to grow up, to become love, to become caring, to get rid of our self-centeredness, to make life about other, not just about self. And that's the overall bigger purpose of why we're here. And why are we in this virtual reality? Because that gives us a context in which we have a lot of very meaningful choices. Choices, ethical choices, moral choices, choices in how we interact with each other and with everything else that's here. So in this virtual reality, you have these meaningful, significant choices because the reality has a rule set that defines how everything interacts with everything else. So choices are fundamental. Whereas, let's say we were consciousness just communicating with each other in a great big chat room, well, there wouldn't be so many meaningful choices there. You could tell the truth or not tell the truth. You could kind of do whatever you wanted, and the ability to grow up would be very limited because your experience would be so limited. So the system said, well, we need a more a tighter context on interactions that creates more interesting, more meaningful, more consequential interactions. And the way to do that is to create a virtual reality for our piece parts to play in and make these better decisions so that they can lower their entropy and learn how to get along with each other and care and work together. And that's what we're here for. So that's just everything in a real tight nutshell. And I know it sounds like more like philosophy and be good and love everybody and kumbaya and all of that, but it really is science, and there really is a logical path to take us, to that conclusion. So it's not just something that sounds good. It actually is the fabric of reality is based upon us lowering our entropy and caring about each other.
But then if we look into the evolution line, at some point there were no life forms that had awareness with the choice, right? So it started appearing whenever the animal kingdom started developing, right? So how did it just appear out of nothing? And if we come back to this physical reality simulation, initially it was simulated without awareness with the choice, and then at some point of evolution, the awareness with the choice or consciousness has been deployed to the life forms somehow.
Okay, well, let's talk about that a little bit. I'd like to go back to the other thing you mentioned about the person who knew that some kind of terrible picture was going to come up before the picture actually came up, because they physiologically started to react to that terrible picture before the computer even picked that picture to come up. So it's not only before the picture was shown, but before the computer actually made the selection of what picture to show.
Oh, really?
Yes. So you have a computer that'll randomly pick a picture, and the person actually reacts to the picture that's going to be picked before it's even picked by the computer.
Oh, wow.
Yeah. So that's, you mentioned that, and I don't want to just leave that alone, because somebody will say, oh, well, he skipped over that question and didn't answer it. But there are answers to that, but I know there's so many places that we can go. It's kind of hard
No. Let's cover this. Let's cover this before we jump to the next thing. Yes. So we can react to the stimulus before we are aware. It has nothing to do with the consciousness in this stage.
In this case, it's not our consciousness that is doing that, but it's the larger conscious system that's running this virtual reality. Okay. So think of it this way, is we have a piece of this larger conscious system configures itself as a computer, and that computer is going to compute our virtual reality. Now, we are pieces of consciousness. We get a data stream. We get that data and we look at it and we interpret it as our reality. This is just the way all of us would be if we were playing a computer game, right? You're sitting in your chair, you've got your mouse, you're looking at your computer. The server sends you data, and you look at that data. You get that data as what, a couple of million pixels of light on a screen, and you interpret those couple of million pixels as rivers and rocks and people and things and that sort of thing. So you get data as consciousness, you interpret it as this reality and interact. And the data you get describes not only your environment, but the other people in your environment and how you interact. It's a multiplayer game. Okay. Now, consciousness operates very, very quickly. It works at a much faster speed. The speed of thought is a lot faster than the speed here in the physical world. We can think things much quicker than we can do things because our bodies are slow. They're electromechanical, devices that use levers and tendons and muscles and things to move stuff around. It's a really slow system. So in order for us to be able to react more quickly to things, the system has to get our slow biomechanical body going in the right direction before we actually have to react. Otherwise, our reaction times would be so slow that we'd be constantly, it's like the old video games where everything was so coarse that, motion was jerky and it was, you could tell that, there were lag times, you'd do something, but it would be a little while before that actually would happen on the screen. And well, that's the way our virtual reality would be if the system didn't help reduce the video lag. That's the lag between the speed of mind, if you will, the speed of consciousness, the way things happen, and the speed of these old clunky electromechanical bodies that we have in this virtual reality. Okay, now they are electromechanical because this is not a programmed reality. This is an evolved reality. We can talk about that. Our virtual reality is not a programmed one. It's an evolved one from a rule set and a set of initial conditions. So that's, and the rule set is what we call science. Scientists try to dig out the rules of the rule set that define our virtual reality. So anyway, if a picture is coming up and it's going to be scary and the person is going to react to it and it's going to be a reaction that isn't delayed. In other words, here's a scary picture, person stares, then the person goes, ah, that's a delayed reaction. But as soon as it comes on, the person reacts. Well, that makes it like real time. So because we have this slow electromechanical body, the system actually starts it prepared to get ready to act at the very small level. If you look at tiny little voltages down inside the muscles, tiny little things going on, then you will see they start before the computer even picks a scary picture.
Oh, wow.
And the reason for that is that, remember, that computer is a virtual computer. It's programmed. It's part of the illusion. It's just information as well. That computer has randomly picking pictures, but it's not random. It's pseudo-random. The system is making that up as well. This is a virtual reality. So the system knows exactly what's coming up next, and it gets the person prepared. It knows what the next random number is going to be, what picture's coming up, and it's got to get that slow electromechanical system up and moving so that when a picture pops up, the person will react to it, rather than the picture comes up and a second later the person reacts to it. Otherwise, we'd never be able to drive cars or fly jet aircraft or do a whole lot of other things that require quick reaction times. We would be a virtual reality game just like the old games where there was always this video lag going on between, what happens and the reaction to what happens would have a lag time in it. So that's why that works that way. It's not proof that there is no free will, that, everything is programmed at all. It's just a show that the larger consciousness system has made a virtual reality that is as realistic as possible. because a good virtual reality is one that you can't tell that it's a virtual reality. So the system wants to make it like that because, we're here, we're interacting, we're making choices and things, and it needs to be credible and believable, and we need to be absorbed in it.
It's definitely very refreshing to realize you actually live in the simulation. Let's come back to the evolution point. So at which point this consciousness has been deployed to the earth, to the specific life forms that have the ability to make choices?
Okay, so in order to answer that, we have to look at where does this reality come from? Where did how did the virtual reality get started, and what is it? Well, the system needed a context in which to make more consequential choices. So what it did is it came up with a set of initial conditions and a rule set of how those conditions could change according to the rules. And then it pushes the run button and it lets those initial conditions change as time goes on, everything changes. Well, think of those initial conditions as this little ball of plasma, high energy, high temperature. It's all in a tiny little space, and the run button's hit, and it starts to expand because the rule set has that as part of the rules, that it will expand, and it has gravity, and it cools, and you make the universe. And you've heard of the Big Bang, and that's how the Big Bang is supposedly to make this universe. But all that's done in a computer. It's a simulated Big Bang. And then it evolves. Okay, so you end up with a sun like ours, with a planet like ours, and then you end up with the right amino acids next to whatever else, and bing, you get a cell. And then these cells start to grow, and you start with single cells like bacteria. They find that they can lower entropy by cooperating, and they become multicelled things. And the multicelled things grow, and they become things like jellyfish, and then they start to have specialization of cells, so that you got the locomotion part, the defense part, the digestion part, the sensor part, and all of those work together. Now you have a lot of cooperating cells, and the more you get cooperation between the cells, the lower the entropy gets, and things evolve, and eventually you end up with fish and people and toads and lizards and so on, and mammals, and here we are. So we evolve according to a rule set. We call that rule set science. Science digs out the rules. That's what we try to do, try to understand the rule set of this virtual reality. So this virtual reality just is, and it developed from the basics, from the Big Bang, if you will, the big digital bang. Okay, now you talk about, well, where did the consciousness come in? Consciousness is what the larger system is. So when this computer simulation finally developed things that had the ability to make choices, well, in the beginning, the system itself, the server for the virtual reality, played all the characters. All the characters were being played by consciousness. So now we got the jellyfish, which makes a few decisions, not a whole lot. And then we get fish who make a lot of decisions. And then we get frogs and so on up in mammals. And the consciousness is making all the choices. And it's making a lot of them maybe randomly, but some not, depending on what they're doing. So the system is just evolving within this computer. Eventually it gets to the point that there are things making choices that would be valuable for a consciousness to make. In other words, they're choices of consequence, choices that make a difference. So then a consciousness logs on and makes those choices. So the system says, okay, I'm not going to make choices for this thing anymore. You, individuated unit of consciousness, you little piece of me, you make the choices for that thing. Okay, so now you have the system sends that consciousness a data stream. The consciousness gets the data stream that defines the reality. The system makes the choices, tells the computer, hey, I made these choices, I made these changes. The system incorporates those changes, computes the effect of those changes, what that means to the other things, and sends back to the player what the changes are. Yeah, player one, right? It sends back to the player what's going on now. So then that player starts making it. So as the things got to a point that they could make choices, and had decision space, then the system could start putting pieces of consciousness to make the choices within that decision space. So that's how our consciousness developed here, is that as we evolved to the point where decision spaces were finite, then consciousness was logged into those things to make those choices.
That makes sense. That makes sense. Thank you. I know from what you're writing in the book that you can also communicate with other being physical or non-physical, because essentially what defines those beings is the information, and if you get the information stream to this being, that's basically how you can talk to, your example, Uncle Fred. You don't talk to specifically Uncle Fred, but you talk to the database that stores all the information about Uncle Fred, but you think that you talk to Uncle Fred. So what else can you do? You also mentioned that you can heal people. How does this work? And generally, just to get us excited about the opportunities and capabilities out there, if we get this data.
Okay, well, I say all the paranormal things take place on the intuitive side, and most of them take place by getting information, getting data, like remote viewing. You're getting data about what's going on some other place. There's another set that work by the principle that, so you haven't gotten into this part of how the reality works, but reality is probability based. Our reality is probability based. And in a reality that's probability based, the system has to know what happens next. When a measurement's made and nobody knows the answer, the system needs to know what to put there. Like, for instance, if you dig a hole in your yard, what's going to come out of that? Dirt, rocks, roots, maybe a gold coin, dinosaur bone, who knows? You don't know what's going to come out of it, but the system has to put something there. So it has to decide what's there because it's an unknown. So when anybody measures an unknown, and it may even be, how long is the stick? Well, that's an unknown. So you measure it. Now, the way the system comes up with unknowns is it takes a random draw from a probability distribution of the possibilities. So it looks at all the possibilities, and each possibility has a probability. Some things are more possible than others. They're more probable than others. So it looks at all of that. Then it takes a random draw, not a random draw from the possibilities. We're not just randomly picking a possibility, but a random draw from the probability distribution of the possibilities, which means that random draw is more likely to get the things that are more probable than it is the things that are less probable. That's how it creates something new. You take a measurement. Okay. So in order to do that, it needs a database. And it needs a database of all the possibilities and their probabilities. So it has this database. And that is available for consciousness because it's a database, and it's a database about our virtual reality and the people who are in it and have been in it. So it's kind of there for anybody to look at. So that's one thing. Now, the other set of things, that's one bunch of paranormal things happen that way. Talking to Uncle Fred, looking at somebody and seeing what their health aura is and what's wrong with them, diagnosing the placebo effect now is different, and healing is different. There, you're actually modifying the probabilities. You're modifying the probabilities with your intent. So if you have an intent that this probability gets higher and this other probability gets lower, so that when the random draw comes, it'll be more likely this way than that way, then you can do that. You can modify those probabilities. So the system has this database with all the probabilities, and you get to modify those probabilities with your intent. That's feedback for us. So in a way, we get to create what happens. We don't really get to create it, but we get an influence to create it. Okay, so now that has been known for a long, long time. I remember back in the 1950s, there was a guy named Norman Vincent Peale who wrote a book called The Power of Positive Thinking.
Okay.
And what he said is that if you think positively, and if you're basically happy and very positive, positive things will happen to you in your life. And if you're grouchy and negative and constantly, negative about things, a lot of negative junk's going to happen to you in your life, and you draw to you the kind of things that you think, the way you think.
Yep.
And everybody knows that sort of works. Experience tells us that, people who are very positive, good things happen to them. And people who are always grouching and complaining, whatever, well, their life is just always full of misery.
They focus on misery.
Right. And the reason that works is because your thoughts, your intents modify that probability. So if you are a negative person, you start putting more energy into those negative things happening. And if you're a positive person, you put more into the positive things happening. So you're modifying that. So if you really, really want the sun to shine next Sunday because you're having a picnic and you put a lot of effort into that, well, the sun has a higher probability of shining. But if somebody else really, really wants rain on Sunday because their crops are drying up, they're going to really, really want rain to happen. And those two probabilities push and pull, and depends on what dominates what, and that's what happens. All within the probability of the possibilities, right? We're not changing possibilities. We're just moving probabilities around.
That makes sense.
So that's the way reality works. And the reason our reality has to be probabilistic is because that is so much simpler to compute. It's much easier to model things probabilistically. But now our rule set is primarily deterministic. The rule set is mostly deterministic with some randomness thrown in because there's some natural things that are random, like decay, atomic decay. The way that particle shoots out is random. It doesn't shoot out in a particular way. The direction that a particle shoots out of a element that's decaying is random. So the rule set has some probability, but mostly it's a deterministic thing. So the probability distributions of what are the possible things to happen, we can develop that out of the rule set because we know what's here now. We know what's going on. We can determine what's likely to happen next, sort of. And the things that we guess at, well, if those are wrong, we just have to go change the probabilities that are affected by that thing we got wrong. So we have this database based on probability. So now, let's say if I'm the larger conscious system and I want to do something just as simple as, I don't know, an old example I usually use is like you fire a cannon, and I use a cannon because it's a very simple machine. It's just a tube with gunpowder at one end and a ball, in front of it, and you light the powder, it gets hot and expands and pushes the ball out. Very, very simple machine. But to do that at the molecular and at the atomic level would take all of the supercomputers we have on the planet working together. Would probably take them a whole day just to compute that one fire, because it's that complicated if you're going down at the subatomic level and working your way up. It's too hard to do that way. It's much easier looking at that cannon, firing it 1,000 times, looking at the probability of where the ball lands and says, well, okay, out of 1,000 fires, the greatest probability will be here, and then it's a little less probable there. And now when the gun fires and you want to model it, all you have to do is reach in, grab a random number out of that distribution, and that's where you put the cannonball. You see, that's really simple. So doing that is a simple way. That's why quantum physics works the way it does, because this is a top-down probabilistic model. Our reality really is created in probability. Now, if you have a simulation that is not probability-based, but is based from the ground up, we start with subatomic particles and build up atomic particles and then build up, that if you do that, not only is it insanely hard and difficult to do, and it takes a huge amount of computation that requires to happen very fast. Okay? So it just doesn't work. It's too hard. But if you build it from ground up, you always know what's going to happen next, because you've got all the structure of where it's going. All you have to do is just extrapolate to the next delta t, and that's what's going to happen. When you have a top-down probability model, you don't know what's going to happen next. You see, because you don't have the underlying structure to tell you what's going to happen next. All you have is probabilities. So that's why this random draw from the probability distribution of the possibilities is the method for determining what happens next. And go ahead. You had a question popping up there.
Yes. So I'm thinking, if our reality is probabilistic, right, then it means that the big consciousness that has created this virtual reality simulation doesn't know what's going to happen, right?
No, it never knows what's going to happen until it takes the random draw. Now, it has all the possibilities and the probability of those possibilities, so it's a pretty good guesser, but it doesn't really know either until it happens, right? Nobody knows. That's why free will works. Nobody really knows the result of the choices that you make. Things happen, and because they happen, you get consequences. So that's, and another one of my examples I use so people kind of get it is that if you're looking out, and if a physicist looks out in a new telescope, brand new telescope, looks further than any telescope has ever looked before, he's going to look out into space and he sees something. What does he see? Well, there's nothing out there to see. That's not really being computed because nobody's looking at it. Remember, it's a virtual reality, it just comes in data streams. So what happens, he looks, he takes a picture, and there could be 1,000 different things there. They all have to be compatible with what we already know. He's not going to find dancing rhinoceros or something there. He's going to find things that are compatible with what we know. And of those 1,000 things, random draw is taken. That's what the picture looks like. Now that he's taken that picture, if he looks again, he'll get the same thing, because once it comes into the reality, it stays in the reality.
Once observed, right?
But it's not like there was something there already that he saw. There was nothing there. It's only after he looks that he gets data, and now that defines that space. That data's there. So nothing really is there until the measurement is made. You see?
That makes sense. And then, since we are talking about quantum physics concepts here, just wanted to understand, well, that's what we've talked about just now, the necessity of an observer for the reality to become true, or for the probabilistic wave to collapse into matter, or an observation that is measured, right? But then another thing that is also one of the quantum physics concepts is quantum entanglement, which to me means that two particles can exhibit the same properties and do the same actions without dependency on space or time. Is that correct definition? And how can you explain this process?
Well, when you have a probabilistic reality and a virtual reality, that's trivial to explain. It's just an if-then statement. Space doesn't matter. I have this. I'm holding up my finger over here. Of course, you can't see it because it's not on the screen. But if I get it in the screen here, someplace, if I have an electron here and it's a spin up, and I have it entangled with another electron over here that's spin down, and if I flip this one down, this one will flip up. Right? So I can do that. And now I move these two, 1 billion light years apart. It still works the same way. When I flip one, the other one flips down instantaneously, even though it doesn't matter about space. You see, it's not that. It's just all one thing. It's one system. It's one thing. So space is irrelevant. That's just an if-then statement. It's a simple thing to do. If this is spin up, that's spin down. Space is not one of the variables. So it's an easy thing to calculate. Now, why would the system do something like that? That's because this entanglement, it was created around conservation laws. So you have conservation laws of angular momentum. Spin up has a certain angular momentum. Where's my finger? I can't find it in the camera because this microphone of mine's in the way. All right, if you have a spin up here, that is a certain angular momentum. And if it started out, let's say you had no particles, something happened and you created two particles. You hit a piece of plastic, special plastic with a particle, and bingo, you get two particles. One's up, one's down. Why do you have that? Because there was no angular momentum to begin with. So the total angular momentum still has to be the same, which is an up and a down. They cancel. You get zero. You see? So that's a conservation law. Now, that conservation law doesn't have anything to do with distance. That conservation law just says that this has to remain a total of 0 because it started at a total of 0. So now I have 2 particles for one, and these 2 particles are said to be entangled because they're related to each other. So if I move them at any distance, it doesn't matter. If one flips, the other one flips, because the conservation law says that the total angular momentum of that system has to stay 0. So all of the entanglement was centered around conservation laws: conservation of momentum, conservation of energy, conservation of spin, conservation of whatever. So that's where that came from. It was in order for the conservation laws to remain true, then particles had to move that way. When we got to the point that we had entangled particles, otherwise, if you changed one, then you would be breaking that conservation law. So that's kind of where it came from. But it's a trivial thing to compute in a virtual reality. It's just an if-then statement. If this one's a spin up, that one's a spin down. If you change one, the other one automatically changes. So it's that sort of thing to compute. So that this is a virtual reality, right? There has to be an observer because virtual realities only exist in the mind of the players. They don't really exist outside the minds of the players. So if a player doesn't get some information about an object, that object can't be in the virtual reality. For that object to be in the virtual reality means that some player had to get that object described in data. Some player had to be sent data that had that object in it.
So does it mean then, according to this logic, that let's say there is a big rock under this tree, and if no one looks at it and no one taken measurements, then it means that this rock may or may not be there?
Is that the rock is indeterminate. What's underneath that tree is not known yet. It's not computed. Really? So there is nothing under that tree that's defined. It's a potential that's underneath that tree. Could be a rock, could be a dinosaur bone, could be, anything. And you won't know until you dig down because nothing's being computed there.
Wow.
There's nothing computed there. You only compute what you see, what you sense. You only compute that. So right now, you and I are having this conversation, and the fact that we have internal organs, the fact that we both have brains, there's no brain. It's a virtual brain. No brain is being computed in our head. Only what's being computed is what we see. That's it. Now, if you open up a skull, there's not going to be just a black absence of reality inside your skull. They have to put something in there. So they look at the rule set and what goes in there. Oh, we'll put a brain in there and it'll have these.
So it gets put only as you open the skull, essentially.
Yeah, just like whatever's out there in outer space, it was only because they made the measurement with the telescope. There was nothing out there. It's not like that's what was there. That's what appears to be there. That's the information you get, and that's created right at the moment of the measurement. When you do the random draw from the probability distribution, that determines what's there. And before that was nothing was determined to be there because nobody had made the measurement.
And I guess as we've already, as a humankind, opened so many skulls, the probability of us seeing the same thing when we open another skull is so high. That's why we can be sure that we will see what we are going to see, right?
Right. Well, once you open a skull and you see a brain, well, now you know that's what's inside skulls. But brains are different. You know, some of them have different kinds of things, and some of them have diseases, and some of them are this way or that way. So, there will be differences, but a lot of the things will be the same. Because once you look at it once, but the measurement and what we see here and what happens here has to be in consonance with the rule set. So you're not going to look in somebody's head and find a gearbox in there with a bunch of little wheels spinning around. You see, that won't happen because the rule set doesn't support that. The rule set has us as a biological thing, and we're carbon-based, hydrocarbon-based critter. So we're going to have a hydrocarbon-based brain, and it's going to have certain functions. So the reason, there is a connection between the avatar and what the consciousness can do with that avatar. Okay, the consciousness can only do with the avatar what the rule set says that avatar can do. So if the consciousness says, Tom, flap your arms real fast and fly. Well, I may flap my arms as fast as I can, but I'm not going to fly because the rule set says that's not going to happen. Mm-hmm. I can't move my arms that fast, and my hands aren't big enough to move that much air. And,
I see.
I can't do it. So I can only do what the rule set allows. So the rule set, when you open a person's head, is going to have to show what had to be there biologically in order for this body to function, because it evolved here. It evolved from things that had little tiny brains, like a jellyfish, or maybe no brain at all. And eventually it evolved a brain, and then it evolved bigger brains in mammals and so on. So because of that evolution, according to our rule set, you open a skull, that's what you're going to find. Just in the same way as that if I'm in a car accident and I have brain damage, now maybe I lose my memory, maybe I drag a foot because I can't walk very well anymore. And now my consciousness has to deal with an avatar that drags its foot and can't remember. You see, because the rule set limits what the avatar can do with that.
Interesting.
I mean, what the conscious can do with that avatar. So yes, you bang an avatar over the head, and it doesn't hurt the consciousness, but it limits what the consciousness can do according to the rule set.
I see. And since we're talking about these fundamental physical concepts, and you mentioned before that everything in future exists as probability wave, does it mean that, well, I guess the question is around time, what time is. I know it's sort of an illusion. It depends on in which rule set you are, and that's what we use as a tool to help us determine our characteristics. But is past then, in the sense that we know of time, is it set, or we can interact with the past reality somehow? Because I remember even Einstein was theoretically saying that with certain specific conditions there can be the ways to access the past, so it's not excluded in theory. Okay. So I'm curious to understand what your view is on time and on interaction and interdependency of past and future.
Okay. Time is not an illusion. You hear that because the scientists are trapped into saying that, even though that's silly. We experience time, time is not an illusion at all. Time is generated when you generate our time. Now, our virtual reality has its own clock. Every virtual reality can be on a different clock, but the virtual reality that runs the physical universe virtual reality, what we call the physical universe virtual reality, that has its own time. When you do a simulation and create information that describes things, you have to have an outer time loop. That's called a dynamic simulation. Means you increase time by 1 delta t and recompute where everything is. This thing's moving, and well, now it's here. Next delta t, it's here. Next delta t, it's there. Next delta t, it's out here. That's a dynamic simulation. So time, for us, is generated by the outer time loop in the simulation. Okay, that's our time. Some other virtual reality may have its own clock, where time may run differently, because the simulation that needs a lot of high resolution is going to need a real small delta t for that resolution. Okay, and then you're going to have a whole lot of them real fast go by to make up, a whole day's worth of time. Whereas a simulation that has real low resolution may skip by hour by hour by hour, might be skip through it because there's just not much going on there. So different virtual realities have different clocks, but time is fundamental. Remember, consciousness requires a choice, or it's not consciousness. Choice requires time before and after the choice. Time is fundamental. Now, regular time, which means time like a metronome that's regular, a beat, a clock, time by which you can make measurements by which you can order things by, I call that regular time. That was probably the first technology that the consciousness system invented. And it needed to invent that to give it more ways in which it could lower entropy, more ways, bigger decision space, because it could not only do patterns and patterns of patterns, but it could do sequences of patterns of sequences. You see, so there's more possibilities. So regular time was just one of these consciousness cells flipping between a 0 and a 1. Remember, this is a computational system, so that's a metronome, and that sets the clock for everything else. So now our virtual reality does one delta t for every maybe billion ticks of the fundamental clock of consciousness. So there is time. Time's fundamental to reality. It's not an illusion at all.
Okay.
Regular time is a little newer than fundamental time. Before, time just kind of happened, but it wasn't something you could measure anything with. Regular time makes time something that you can measure and keep track of. So time is a fundamental thing, comes in with consciousness and choice. Remember, we had consciousness and choice, and its opposite is determinism and materialism. And if you're a determinist and a materialist, then you have to say time's an illusion, consciousness is an illusion, and free will's an illusion.
Okay, yeah, I see.
If you're on the opposite corner and you say free will and consciousness exist, and therefore time exists, then you look and you say, well, materialism is an illusion and determinism is an illusion. Those two things are logically incompatible.
I see.
You can't have both. And people who do mix and match, they're just not logical. It's illogical to mix and match. You can't say, well, yeah, I believe in materialism, but I also think there's time or there's consciousness or there's paranormal, but I'm still a materialist. They are just not being logical. They're saying things that don't mix logically. You have to be on one of those corners or the other. You can't mix between them. They're totally
incompatible.
Incompatible, completely incompatible. So because scientists are materialists, they have to say things like time is an illusion, consciousness is an illusion, and free will is an illusion, because they've decided they're materialists. They have to be determinists, and that's what they have to say. So they say it, but they don't have any really good reason to say it. They say it because they know it must be true, because they know that materialism is true. That's a belief.
A belief, yeah.
They have this belief. That's where you get the time is an illusion, and that's a scientific idea now, because that's part of the belief in materialism, but it's just wrong. It's not like that at all. Consciousness is fundamental, you see. So that's the basic thing. You mentioned, yes, time's an illusion. Everybody thinks time is an illusion because they hear that, because our culture is a materialistic culture, and that's part of our belief system, but it's wrong. Now, what about past? What about past and present and future? We have databases that keep track of the past. We have a database that looks at the probabilities in the future, all the things that could happen and the probability that they will happen. Okay. And as time ticks through, all those probabilities move through in the past now. So the past really is not just the past of everything that happened. It's all the things that could have happened and the probability that they would have happened. That's the past database. Now there's just one little thread that snakes its way through that past database, which is everything that did happen. Okay. Now, so all that data is available to us. So we can go see what did happen. And this database is much better than Google, because not only can you go look at it like looking at a movie, like you're seeing a video of the past, but you can get into the video. You can be a character in the video. You can go back and into the past and be there, but you can't, let me put it another way. You can't actually change the database, but you can go through that database and see, you can do what-if analysis. You can go into that database and say, all right, here I am at right at the place where I made the decision to marry Sally and not Sue. Now, that made a lot of changes in a lot of people's lives when I made that decision, because I could have picked either one, but I married Sally and not Sue.
Mm-hmm.
So it changed Sally, it changed Sue, it changed Sally and Sue's parents, their friends,
Yeah.
So it changed, all kinds of things changed because of that choice. So I can go back to that spot and I could say, what if I'd have married Sue instead? What would it be likely? Now it'll go through all the possibilities. And I can say, I'd like to see all the most likely things that would have happened after that and where that would have gone. I said, I'd like to see it after we had been married 5 years, 10 years, 20 years, 50 years. Where would that have most likely gone? And now I'm
Wow.
just skipping through that database of all the things that could have happened and the probability that they would have. You see, I'm just
Mm.
going through that database. I could also say, I'd like to see the fourth most probable thing that would have happened 5 years, 10 years. Everyone's now the fourth
Mm-hmm.
most probable thing. All the data is there. So I can go and go through that database. And now I'm looking at a movie based on those probabilities in this what if analysis. Okay, but it doesn't change anything. So I
Mm-hmm.
can be in that movie. I can actually be a character in that movie. And I could do things to alter those probabilities. I could go in there and say, okay, but what if 5 years later, Sue, when I married her, she won the lottery? How would that change? Well, there's another set of probabilities goes off. So I can make changes and see different things happening. But all I'm doing is exploring this everything that could have happened and the probability that it would have database. And I can get into it, make all kinds of what ifs, see how that happens, be a character, make changes, but the database remains the same. I'm not changing the database. I'm just exploring it through different probability.
I see. And you do it through entering to the intuitive space
Yes,
that we were
intuitively.
talking about
That
before.
data is accessed through the intuitive space. Exactly.
So have you explored your own life this way?
Some little bits of it. I don't generally try to look at futures because that is getting in my own way. What life is about is that stuff happens and you get to deal with it. And how you deal with it makes a difference of, whether you evolve or de-evolve. Your dealing with it is your choices. So it doesn't matter so much what happens. What matters, what's really important, is how you deal with it. Do you deal with it positively or negatively? So that's really what life is all about. Most people focus on making what they want to happen be the thing that happens. They want to manipulate life to be the way they want it. They try to do all those things to make life come out the way they want it. So what's important to them is what happens. But what happens really isn't that important. Let what happen be whatever it is. That's not terribly important. It doesn't mean you can't make plans. It just means that it's not the main thing going on in your life. Sure, you can make your plans, but you don't worry about the details or how it comes out for the most part. You do what you think is right and you let things fall out however they do. Then you deal with them. So that's the way life is. So now if you start looking into the future and saying, well, okay, let's see, the highest probability on this path is that I'm going to die of an automobile accident. I'm going to stop driving automobiles. Well, now you change everything. Now you no longer drive automobiles and you made all sorts of other things different. Is that good? Is that bad?
Yeah, you don't know.
You see, you start interfering with your life and with your options. Your choices change. You interfere. So people who are really powerful at modifying future probability generally don't, because they don't want to live in a bubble of their own creation. Pretty soon you're living in this bubble that you've created. And okay, you never get sick, all these things don't happen to you, but you're living in an artificial bubble. So the stuff that happens that you get to deal with and by that grow up, you've just kind of ruined your own game by being in this bubble. So basically,
because you've created this bubble most likely because of fear, right? Because of your
right,
ego, to protect yourself. And that prevents your growth.
Exactly. You got it. Yeah, you're pretty sharp. You got that exactly right. So you just don't do that, and the people who really want to change things and want to control things, those are the people who really aren't very good at it. because they haven't grown up that much yet, and they still have a lot of ego and they still have a lot of fear. So they're not all that powerful because it's hard for them to keep their mind focused because the fear and the ego gets in the way. And, so it's like that. So yeah, you can change that, and you can modify reality a little bit sometimes to be more convenient, but in general, you just don't. You just let it happen however it happens, because that's the way it is. And you don't bother about what the future is. It'll be whatever it is. And that's optimizes your ability to learn and grow, which is really what's important in the first place. So yes, you have this system of probabilities, future probabilities, and you can modify them. And you can modify them with a fair amount of power. But when you do, you create other things. Like when you heal people, you can heal with your intent. You just have an intent that as things change, the probabilities are going to be more health rather than more sickness. Change the probability. That's the same way the placebo effect works. And that's a part of our legislature. You can't sell a drug if it can't beat the placebo effect. So that changes the probabilities because it changes what people think. The placebo is, you say, oh, this pill is a wonderful new pill. It's going to cure you, la, 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 la. And if you believe that, then you start thinking more positive instead of more negative. And it
you
changes.
raise the probability.
It changes. You change the probabilities. It changes the way things happen. So yes, you can create that bubble around yourself, but it's dysfunctional. And the only reason for creating in the first place is because you're dysfunctional. Like you say, it's because you have ego and you have beliefs, you have fear. That's why you would want to create the bubble to protect yourself. There's no need to protect yourself. Life is. And if it looks like you might get in a crash and die, well, okay, maybe that'll happen. But that's not a big deal. That's the other thing. Once you understand reality, death loses its sting. Death isn't a big deal. It's just another part of the game. Nobody gets upset when their elf dies, or when their Sims character loses their job. You don't go out and cry because of it. It's the way it is. You deal with it. And when you die, you deal with it by learning all the lessons and going off and starting another one. So it's just part of the process, and it's not like a terrible thing to be avoided. It's just part of the way reality works. We need that death. If we didn't have that death, we'd get ourselves backed into corners of belief, and we wouldn't learn. We'd have all these beliefs that would block out new information, and we just kind of sit there, and our ability to learn and grow would shrink and shrink and shrink, and everybody would have that been there, done that, I know everything kind of attitude, and it wouldn't be good at all. It wouldn't be healthy. But you need a restart. You need to reboot the system every once in a while, so you get out of all the corners you painted yourself into and all your beliefs and all the rest of that stuff. Take the quality you've earned, get to start again with a whole different situation, whole different set of rules or lack thereof, and see what you make of that kind of thing. Now that's the challenge that lets you grow.
Yeah, and it's a powerful way to look at things. It's I guess very healthy, even psychologically, to maintain this perspective that you're here to learn, and you shouldn't, try to get out of your breast to grasp to the things that you have in this reality, or the things that you perceive yourself need. So if I may summarize it for our listeners, the very source of our creation is consciousness, which is the same as information system, big computer if you want. And pieces of consciousness are what we are. And the bodies that we have are just avatars that we use specifically for this lifetime in order to live it, and during it we can increase the order or lower the entropy of our consciousness. And the way we do it is basically by making the right choices. And right choices obviously boil down to key values and love that people share with each other. Now, there are a few questions that arise from there. So when you say that we are essentially using this physical materiality that we live in as virtual reality for these specific pieces of consciousness to learn. Now, the first question that arises is how what we think is real, what seems so real and has so many rules, it can be virtual in a way. So it's really hard to grasp. And then a second part that you mentioned was that essentially, in order to lower the entropy, we need to somewhat fight our ego. And the question here is, why do we have ego in the first place? Is it something that is a function of high entropy then in ourselves?
Okay, so we'll talk about those things. Let's talk about the ego first. Mm-hmm. And to do that, we have to understand the nature of consciousness a little bit. So let me say that consciousness is simply awareness with a choice. It's just awareness as a choice. Now, if you have a choice, that has some logical consequences. If you really have a choice, then that means you have free will, because if you don't have free will, then you don't really have a choice. There is no choice. Also, if you have a choice, that brings in time, because it was now and after the choice and before the choice and after the next choice. So things change. Change defines time. You can't have any change if you don't have time. You can't lower entropy. You can't evolve. You can't learn if there is no time, because all those have a before and after state. So that brings in time. So when we say that we have awareness, we're conscious, and we have free will, now we also then have time. Time, free will, and consciousness are all logically necessary for each other. You can't have one without the other two. They all go together, and they are completely opposite and incompatible with their opposite corner is materialism and determinism. So they're two opposite things. All right. So given that that's consciousness, now consciousness is awareness. And one of the things that you can have within this awareness is fear. Fear is the opposite of love. So love is in the positive direction. Fear is in the negative direction. Okay, so you can order things according to fear.
Yeah.
So fear is the source of ego, and fear is the source of most belief. So by fear, I'm not talking about that the bear is going to get you in the woods. I'm talking about fear as a being, fear of not being good enough, fear of being inadequate, fear of not being lovable, fear of people won't like you, fear of not being appreciated, and they go on and on and on. Yeah. These are fears. And the ego tries to cover up and deny those fears. It tries to make those fears seem less significant and less important. It tries to whitewash those fears so they appear to go away. So if, let's say, you have a fear of being inadequate, then you may have an ego that says, "Oh, I'm adequate. I'm good. I'm really smart. And I know all sorts of things." And that would be part of your ego. You're feeling, puffed up about yourself. We call that ego. But it also could be just the opposite. If you fear that you're not good enough, instead of being arrogant, you might be the shrinking violet that shrinks back into the corner and is afraid to say anything to anybody, because if you said something, it wouldn't be much, and people might laugh at you, or it just wouldn't be very adequate, whatever it is you say. So you can have opposite reactions to that, but they're both ego.
Yeah.
And ego is a device by which we use so that we don't have to look at the fear. We don't have to deal with the fear. We pretend something in order to keep us from dealing with the fear. Now, belief is also created by fear. And that is, if we, one of the big fears we have are things we don't understand. The unknown frightens us. And we often then will come into beliefs. We'll make up a belief to make us think that we know something. and feel better then. Oh, well, that's not an unknown. I know how that works. It's like this.
Mm-hmm.
And that's not necessarily true, but it's a belief and it makes us feel better. So belief is often the same as ego in the sense that it makes us feel better. That's part of its job, because we have a belief that suits us, that satisfies the way we feel or the way we think. Then in our own mind, we turn that belief into a fact. So everybody who has beliefs thinks their beliefs are facts, because that's kind of the trick. That's the idea, to convince yourself that you know more and understand more than you really do. So there's lots of beliefs that people have, that are similar to the ego, but a little different. And in MBT, we try to, we say that you should believe nothing. You should always be skeptical of everything. And that includes everything I tell you, everything you read, everything you hear. You should be skeptical of it, but you should also be open-minded. Because if you're not open-minded, that means you're trapped in a belief. You have a belief, therefore this couldn't possibly be true because I have a belief to the contrary. And because a lot of people have a belief to the contrary, so it couldn't possibly be true. You see, that is being closed-minded and living your life through your ego and your beliefs. And that's what gets us all in trouble.
I see. So essentially, ego is what is constituted by beliefs and fear. And by definition, wrong beliefs and fear cannot help us evolve and lower our entropy, right? And that's how ego comes into place, right?
That's right. But it's not bad fear and bad ego. All ego and beliefs and fear are bad. So I would say that there probably are no good beliefs. There are probably some beliefs that are pretty neutral, don't matter a whole lot one way or another. There's probably a lot of those around. But belief in general is just not a good idea. You shouldn't believe things. You should not disbelieve things, because disbelieving things is just another form of belief. It's just the kind of the negative belief value rather than the positive belief value. But if you believe things, then your mind is closed to things being other than what you believe. If you believe things, then when new information comes in that's contrary to your beliefs, you either deny it or you blow it away. You pass it off. You refuse to look at it. So belief, I call is a trap. You get into a belief, you're trapped. You cannot get new information. You're stuck. You're in a belief trap. And now the amount of information that you can use to grow or to become or to see bigger pictures or to enhance your understanding is limited. You can't understand but so much because you have beliefs. That's why you should always be skeptical of everything. And as we started out saying, if it's not your experience, it cannot be your truth. So you should want to personally, gather your information and your knowledge and not say, well, I can't really get that myself, so I'll just read about it and believe it. Well, sometimes that's true. You can't experience everything. But the things that you can experience, instead of believing them or disbelieving them, you should just give them a probability of being true. Say, well, I think this is 90% likely to be true, or 10% likely to be true, and not throw it in that probability of 1, it's true, or that probability of 0, it's false. So very, very few things in your life should be a 1 or a 0 probability. Most of the things in your life should be somewhere in between. All right, some maybe 0.999 and you call those true, but it's better to not think of it that way. It's better to say they're just 0.999, and I may get some information that'll make that just 0.9 and then maybe 0.8. I'm always open to everything changing. So that's the mindset that you really need to have if you're going to understand the My Big Toe theory. You have to come at it with being open-minded, but being very skeptical. And be willing to explore, being willing to find out for yourself. And there's lots of ways to do that.
Yeah, and we will talk about these ways because I do understand that some of our listeners may wonder, okay, now we have this big toe theory that's, just brings in a very large concept. How do we ever, how can we ever be able to experience it and understand it and prove whether it's true or not? So we are going to come to this. But before we do, and I do remember that I've asked you about the physical reality, how can it mean that it's virtual? But even before we cover that, because that's something that came up a lot before, you were talking about consciousness as awareness with a choice, which means that, us human beings have it and animals supposedly also have it. But now, does it mean that all animate objects have it? Plants, fish, any simpler forms of life? Or there is a line between where there is just awareness and where there is awareness with a choice?
Yes, there is such a line.
Mm-hmm.
Everything is not conscious. Rocks are not conscious. The expression "dead as a doornail." Doornails are not conscious.
Mm-hmm.
Things like that. But we wonder about trees. Are trees consciousness? Is a clam conscious?
Mm-hmm.
Well, the only way to find out is to test that animal or that thing and see whether it makes any free will choices. And it has to make a choice. Now, you can make choices without being free will. You can make choices just because it's programmed. Okay.
Mm-hmm.
Some choices are like that, and we call that stimulus and response. For example, you have a sunflower, and it follows the sun. As the sun moves, the sunflower actually moves its face
Mm-hmm.
and looks at the sun. And is that conscious because the sunflower consciously wants to keep its face toward the sun? Or is it the fact that the sun heats up one side of the stem and the other side of the stem is cooler, and that makes a little torque in the stem, which rotates it and follows the sun?
Mm-hmm.
Now, then that is hardwired. It's not a thought. It's not a choice. It just happens because the machine is wired that way. A program, your computer sitting on your desk right now is not conscious, although it can do a lot of amazing things, and it can find your misspelled words, and it does a lot of things that make it seem very intelligent, but it's just programmed. It follows directions. And if you give it the exact same input in the exact same situation, you'll get the exact same answer every time because it's algorithmic. It's another way of saying hardwired. It's algorithmic. So things that are algorithmic are not conscious. They're just a machine that does what they do. Whether it's a biological machine or a mechanical machine doesn't make any difference.
But then the question comes to mind. Do we not have this element of being pre-programmed? Do not our, cultural or family or early childhood beliefs come to place? And also, a separate note that I think I've read somewhere that there were studies on how people react to certain things, and essentially there were images of unsafe situations presented to them at high speed, and the amygdala, which is the area of the brain that reacts to danger, reacted before people consciously knew what was presented. So people were not aware what was presented, but still they were making choices inside. But does it mean that they have been making choices, or it's just they are pre-programmed to make them?
Okay. Those are two good questions. First of all, to have free will does not mean that you don't have any controls on you. Free will does not mean I can do anything I want anytime I want. And obviously there is no free will, because otherwise I'd be rich and famous and good looking too, because I choose all those things. Well, it doesn't mean that you have a genie with, infinite wishes. That's not free will. Free will is defined as you have a thing I call the decision space. That's all the decisions that you might make. And your decision space is only as large as what about the decisions you're aware of. Let's say you have a problem and you have an awareness that there are 10 paths that you could take toward solving this problem. Now, there may really be 50 different ways to solve that problem, but you're only aware of 10 of them. Okay, now those 10 possibilities that you could choose, that constitutes your decision space, because you could choose any one of those 10 that you wish to. So your decision space is 10 in that case. Now, anything that has a finite decision space, in other words, if it can make even a choice, then it has consciousness. But if it's only, and I mean a choice between things, so that's an A or a B, then you're conscious if you can pick between two things. So that's a choice. Then you are conscious, but you may be in extremely dim consciousness. All consciousness isn't, human. There's lots of levels of consciousness, lots of levels of capability and capacity. So, a dog is conscious. It can make choices, but its decision space is very small compared to a human. A human has a whole lot more choices in their decision space. Now you take a dolphin, it has a brain that's bigger than ours. It has frontal lobes where all that complex thinking is bigger than ours. But the number of choices that it can make are more limited than ours because of the environment it lives in and the kind of animal it is. It doesn't happen to have these opposable thumbs that can reach out there and build all the things that we can build. Well, an ability to choose to build or not to build, those are more choices. So that's decision space. A finite decision space is a requirement for consciousness. So let's look at a clam. Okay, and we see a clam and it sticks its foot out, and that's how it pushes itself around, as it sticks that foot out. Now, if you touch that clam's foot, if you reach in and just touch that foot, that clam will jerk that foot into the shell. And why does it do that? Does it do that because it's conscious and says, oh, something just bothered my foot, I better pull it in for safety? Or is that just hardwired? When you touch a clam's foot, the foot always comes in. Or is it a choice? Now, biologists would have to take a clam and do some research with it to decide whether that was hardwired or whether that clam could make a choice to leave that foot out there if it wanted to. Could you train a clam such that you could touch its foot? But now even hardwired things can learn, like your computer can learn to help you spell words better. It can learn what books you prefer and then send you, things about those books. So the clam may just have an adaptable hardwiring system that could change based on change in its environment. So it's hard to tell at a certain level. But yes, somewhere there is this line between what might be just aware but not conscious. Trees are on that line somewhere. We know that trees might be aware. We don't know for sure, but they do a lot of fancy work under the ground between their roots, how they communicate with each other. Now, is all that algorithmic and hardwired, or is some of that intentional? We don't know for sure. Some people think it's intentional. Some people aren't so sure. So we'll work on that, because it's possible to have awareness, just have an awareness, but no choices. So is a tree like that? Does it have some fundamental awareness, but it really doesn't have any choices? That's a possibility. But we would say it is not conscious unless it has at least some choices. So if it decides that it can send nutrients over to the other little seedling that's having a problem, if it decides to do that with an intention, it's conscious. If it just does that because it's hardwired, it is not conscious.
I see. Makes sense. That raises two questions. First, what happens when we've learned everything? When, there are people who are really selfless in a way, and they really are not acting like that. And then the second question is, do we only learn from this reality, which is our Earth's physical reality, or there's some other?
Okay, the very short answers to those, the short answers aren't very interesting, but to give the short answer first, that is, we learn from every reality that we're in. We can be in multiple realities. We're not stuck just in this reality. Okay, we get a data stream but we can interact with consciousness. We're a piece of consciousness, so we can interact in other virtual realities that are available for us to interact in. One of those is called a night dream. At night we dream. That's another virtual reality. And as you make choices in any reality, those choices affect the quality of your consciousness. If you make good choices in your dreams at night, then you are evolving. If you make poor choices in your dreams at night, then you're de-evolving. Same with your daydreams. Same with your out of body. Same with any reality that you might get into. They're all virtual realities. See, conscious is fundamental, and everything else is a virtual reality. Anything that you can experience has to be a virtual reality, because experience requires context. Context requires rules. Mm-hmm. So anything that's basically a rule-based reality, that's a virtual reality. It's all information-based because it's all consciousness. So when you dream, it's another virtual reality. When you go out of body, it's a different virtual reality. When you go to another reality system, sort of like ours, that seems physical, not like a dream or a daydream, but it actually is physical, then that's a different reality, different virtual reality. So there's other places, but any place you make a choice, daydream, night dream, out of body, that choice is your choice, and it helps you evolve or de-evolve. So you learn everywhere. There's nothing more real than information. So the information that defines this reality we call the physical universe and the information that defines your dream reality are equally real. They're just different. It's just a different data stream. It's like going from World of Warcraft to Sims to, something else. These are all just different virtual realities that you can engage in. But they're all you making choices, evolving or de-evolving.
That's so interesting, because I always, I don't remember my dreams very often, but when I do, they normally based on some past events, and I make choices that I didn't want to make. So I wake up and think, oh my God, I did make the choice that I wanted to, even in a dream, but at least I have this real reality where I can act. And I had the perception that it's just the combinations of thoughts, if you want, that are based on our past events, but not something that is a complete separate virtual reality. So that's something new for me to learn.
Yeah, well, it can be a lot of different things. Dreaming doesn't just have one format or one mode that it's in. I remember one week before Christmas, this is probably a decade ago, that I had this huge pile of Christmas letters to get out. And there was 100 of them. And Pamela was stuffing envelopes and I was licking them and putting the stamps on. And after sitting there for 3 hours licking envelopes and putting the stamps on, when I dreamed that night, what was I doing? I was licking envelopes and putting stamps on them, So that was a dream, but that wasn't a dream that caused me to evolve or de-evolve. And it was just the fact that I had done that so much for so long, a tedious little task, that I just kept on doing it, when I was, so dreaming can be different. You can dream and a lot of people when they have out of bodies, they think that their dream, they occur at night, and then they believe it's a dream. The difference is that when you're out of body, you remember it. It's clear. It doesn't fade. And even 5 years later, you can look at it and remember every detail of it. That was an out of body, not a dream. The dreams are a little different thing, and the dreams fade pretty quickly when you've had a dream. But yes, everything you've done in a dream is what you would really do. That's you on the inside. Because when you dream, your intellect doesn't go with you. When you dream, you take your being level. It's just who you are inside. It's your core of you. And that's what's making the choices in the dream. So anything you do in a dream, that's who you really are. When you act here, you have this intellect that considers, oh, that wouldn't be polite. Oh, that wouldn't be a good idea. I shouldn't do that. That would be wrong. That's your intellect coming in. But who you really are is what you do in your dreams, because that intellect isn't in your dream unless you have if your intellect's in your dream, then you call that a lucid dream. That's a different dream. That's a dream where your intellect is with you.
Yeah.
But
I see.
most dreams are not lucid. They're just dreams. And when they're not lucid, they fade, and they are absolutely who you are. The
I
choices
see.
you make are just you. So if you do something terrible in your dream, well, then you're capable of making that terrible choice. That's a choice
Okay.
you would make. So that's
Interesting.
part of what makes dreams such a valuable place to learn. You see, we learn all the time. We learn when we're here awake. We learn when we sleep and dream. We learn day and night. It's like it's all the time. That's a wonderful place to learn because you don't have this intellect that is acting out an image of who you think you should be and how you should be. See, that's the part that acts kind rather than is kind. That's the actor. That's your image. Oh, I wouldn't do that here because, that wouldn't be a good thing to do because I'm polite and I learned that from my culture. Well, that's one thing. But if you do it in your dreams, then you would do that because you don't
That
have
makes
that.
sense.
Yeah, you don't have that part. So the dream becomes an excellent place to learn and to grow. And it's partly when sometimes you get dreams, they're tests. You get tested by the system just to see where you are, what you're ready for next, what kind of challenges you're ready for. So they'll give you a dream where you have to make choices. And by the choices you make, they know that's really you. They're not talking to your ego and they're not talking to your beliefs because they're all in that intellect. That intellect that programs you to be polite, that's your fear and your ego run that intellect a lot.
I see.
They inform that intellect a whole lot. But when you're in your night dreams, you just are who you are. So,
Okay. So I want to talk about out of body experiences because this is
okay.
something that I've never experienced myself, and maybe listeners also haven't done it. So I want to talk about this, and I want to talk also about this in connection with the dreamlike states, because every I guess my understanding is that every state of altered consciousness, be that our awakened consciousness or our dream consciousness or out of body experience, is characterized by certain brain waves. And that's how, at least from the outside in perspective, we can determine which state we actually are. And before we go into the connection of brain waves and out of body, I wanted to understand what happens when we are in deep sleep, which is delta waves, when our consciousness is switched off. Where does it go? What happens to it?
Well, it depends. Again, it depends on who you are, how many times you've been around this circle, how much entropy you have gotten rid of, and so on. Different people act differently, but for most people, when they lose consciousness, okay, that's their intellect no longer has any input. It doesn't necessarily mean that their consciousness is gone. It just means their awareness of the consciousness is gone. Okay, so the consciousness may still be active, but it's no longer including the intellect in what it's doing.
But consciousness is awareness with a choice. If I have no idea of my awareness, then which choices can I make?
You may be making choices. In other words, your intellect isn't the only thing that makes choices. So you define yourself as an intellect. And if your intellect is gone, well, maybe somebody's, giving you gas and putting you out for a procedure that they're operation, and you're giving anesthesia. Well, now your intellect is no longer engaged, but you might have an out of body while you are unconscious, and that out of body, you may watch yourself being operated on. So you may be aware and you may be thinking and you still may be making choices, even though you're totally unaware as far as your conscious, your intellectual awareness is not participating. But it
Okay.
doesn't necessarily mean that your consciousness is not doing anything.
Okay.
So it depends. If you're more evolved, then you tend to do a lot more during that time that you're out. If you're not so much, you just kind of rest. There's not a lot for you to do.
I see.
It just depends on how aware you are and what you do with your
Okay.
consciousness during that time. But the body requires some downtime.
I see.
Your body just can't keep going. It requires, this physical electromechanical machine that we've got here requires for the trash to be taken out every once in a while, and it needs to recuperate and
Cool
rebuild.
down.
And it just needs to take care of its biological business, and you need some sleep for that. And it's not that you're off doing every time you lose consciousness, you go do this. It's not like that at all. You may do nothing.
Okay.
It may just be a blank period, or you may do things. You may be aware and you may be interactive. So it kind of depends on the level of that awareness. That's why I say it kind of depends on where you are in the evolution game, because if you're more aware, then you're not as limited to just your intellectual viewpoint. You've got other viewpoints that you can work with.
I see. That's clear. Okay, so let's then talk about the out of body experiences, because this is something completely fascinating to me, and I've never had one, as I said, and I've heard about your experience describing them and others, and I always felt it's something beyond real, beyond mystical, not really real. And coming back to the point that we mentioned in the beginning, that you're saying that you have to have an open mind and be skeptical, and you shouldn't believe anything unless it's your own subjective experience. So I understand that in order to experience this larger reality, to experience more capabilities of consciousness, that's what can help you, meaning out of body experience, right? But I guess it's not in our culture to be common to experience it. So what it is about how you experience it and how maybe others can experience it too.
Okay. An out-of-body experience is a really simple idea. Remember, here we are, a piece of consciousness. We are getting a data stream from a piece of the larger consciousness system that's operating as a server for our reality. And we just let go of that data stream. Now, we let go of that data stream when we fall asleep. When you fall asleep, you let go of that data stream. You're no longer getting it. You're no longer interpreting that as reality. Okay. When you go out of body, you just set that data stream aside, and you get another data stream that defines a different reality. Not this reality. Just like if you're playing World of Warcraft and you have another computer, so you have two computers on your desk, and you leave that computer and you turn your head over to the other one and you start playing The Sims.
Wow.
You see? It's like that. So you leave one, you're getting a data stream that's called World of Warcraft, and you're playing that game. And now you're over here, you're playing The Sims. That's a different game. It's just a different data stream. And how do you go from one to the other?
Yeah, exactly.
Well, you just turn your head from this one to that one and pay attention to that one instead of this one.
How do you do that?
So it is a matter of just shifting your intention to a different data stream. Now, there's another way that we can say the same thing, and that is it's a single player game. We have multiplayer games, which is the multiplayer games have lots of players in it besides what do they call them? The computer characters. There's an acronym for that. Anyway, so the computer has characters in the game, but besides that, there's other players just like you that are playing in the game. That's a multiplayer game. In a single player game, there may be lots of characters, but you are the only one that's a player. The rest of them, the computer is playing those other characters. All right, so most out-of-bodies are single-player games. And all the characters that are in there are characters that the computer is providing. Now, occasionally, you can have out-of-bodies that are multiplayer games with a few players, but you generally don't have a lot of players. You just have some few players, but mostly they're single-player games. It's just a matter of shifting your intent away from this data stream to another data stream. And it is as simple as, it's simpler than falling asleep. Can be done in tenths of a second without much effort. But we have a hard time with it. We, human avatars, have a real hard time with that because we want our intellect to lead. Okay, all the paranormal things take place in the intuitive space, not in the intellectual space. Two different ways. Consciousness has two different pathways that it can process in. It can process intellectually, that's logic. It can process intuitively, that's beyond logic. Intuitively, you just get an answer. You don't derive it, it just comes. It's intuitive. And intellectually, you have to derive the answer. You have to figure it out. You have to logically put the steps together. Okay, two different spaces. Now, we in the West, particularly, have learned to pretty much ignore the intuition. We don't think it's very reliable. You have these different reality streams. Now, the system, larger consciousness system, if you're ready, will send you a data stream. But just to help you learn, put you in another learning space with new things. You're just like Dream was such a good learning space because your intellect isn't there. You know, you get through all your training goes away and it's just who you are. In the out-of-body space, you have your intellect with you, but the situations that can occur are just very different. So you get a whole different set of choices when you're in an out-of-body, just like you do in the dream. And because it's a different space for learning, then you have different kinds of choices than you'd have here.
So how do you get to out-of-body? Is it through meditation or it just stucks you, you know?
Okay, what keeps people from being able to do out-of-body easily is one, belief. They believe that, you know, it's impossible or it's crazy or it's silly or it's difficult, at least. Two, they tend to live in their intellect. When you live in your intellect, it chases away your intuition. The intuition and the intellect are sort of incompatible in a way. Now, they can learn to work together, but the intellect wants to be in charge. The intellect wants to lead. It wants to be aware. It wants to know how this process works.
Yep.
So the intellect is sitting there saying, okay, I'm going to go out of body now. I'm going to lie down and I'm going to get my mind and go someplace else. And the intellect's sitting up there and saying, okay, you're still here, though. I can tell you're still here. Raise your arm and see, that's a physical arm. See, you're still here. So as long as the intellect is sitting there, aware, wanting to be in charge, wanting to see every step of the way, you can't go anywhere. You're stuck because you don't have an intuitive space when your intellect is in charge. So what you have to do is let that intellect go, put it off to the side, and just experience. And the first experience you get, your intellect will jump in and say, oh, is that real? You know, let's say you experience a voice. Something says, hello, Natalia. You know, I'm your great-grandfather. And you go, oh, did I just make that up? So your intellect jumps in immediately and judges it. Is it real? Or did you just make it up? Well, that crashes it. It's gone now because the intellect jumped in. So you have to put yourself in a frame of mind where you can just have experience without judging it, without assessing it, without evaluating it, just have the experience. Now, if you have those kinds of experiences for 3 months, now it's time to go get your intellect, get it back in the game and say, are these experiences valuable? Am I learning anything? Are they going anywhere? And if the answer is no, well, you're not doing it right. You know, it's not helping. You have to do something else.
Mm-hmm.
So you need to bring your intellect in. Otherwise, you could walk down la-la lane and convince yourself of all kinds of things that weren't true.
Yep.
But you can't bring your intellect in the beginning.
Mm-hmm.
In the beginning, you just have to experience and let it go, and experience and let it go, and keep doing that until you have this whole basket full of experience. Now bring your intellect in and judge the experience of whether it's useful or not whether it's true or not, because truth is not the point. Asking, is this true, is the wrong question. Information defines reality. What's true? Is this virtual reality true? Is what you're saying, well, is that true or not? It's information. Now, information can come from three sources. Information can come from the larger conscious system. It can come from some other individuated unit of consciousness, and it can come from yourself, because you're consciousness and you can create information. So the thing is, you want to know that what you're getting is not coming from yourself, because you call that my imagination.
Imagination, exactly.
And you say, oh, it's just my imagination, like, because it's your imagination, it's not real. It's some kind of inferior thing. Okay. Well, that's not true. All information is equally real. All information is equally real. You can make choices based on that information. You can evolve and de-evolve based on the choices you make. All information is equally real. It's just information. So how do you separate these three sources of information? It has to be one of those three. It's the only three sources there are. How do you know which is which? You can never know with certainty. With experience, you can know pretty well, but never with certainty. But you can be a 99.99 because you've had a lot of experience and you know how this information comes and where it's coming from just through experience. But when you're a beginner, you don't know. You can't know with certainty at all.
I see. So I know that this experience can come from meditation. This is I guess, one of the most common pathways for letting go of intellectual mind and trying to bring yourself into intuitive space, so that to open yourself up to these different data streams. Now, I've been doing your program that you've developed with the sound waves that help you to immerse into this meditative space better. And I've been doing it. I'm really loving it, but I'm still there, I cannot cut myself from my reality. Like, I understand that I'm sitting on my floor. I understand that, I'm breathing, although sometimes I have glimpses that are similar to what you would call a lucid dream, like as if you're in a dream, but you are actually not in a dream. So I'm not sure if it's a right direction. And I guess for the listeners who also want to explore the out of body experience path, what your advice would be, how to get there?
Okay, there's two basic ways to get there, and one of them that is the most traditional is through meditation. And basically that way is a way of discipline. Okay, meditation is a discipline, and what it teaches you is to discipline your mind, discipline your consciousness. The idea is to be able to sit quietly and empty your head of thoughts so that you have no thoughts. And when stray thoughts come in, you gently put them aside and go back to no thoughts. And you keep working on that until you can stay for as long as you like, an hour, 2 hours with no thoughts in your mind. No thoughts ever come through. You just sit there with no thoughts. That is practicing mental discipline. And if you can do that, then when you're sitting there with no thoughts, it's rather easy to open yourself up to a different data stream, because you have learned the discipline for your intellect to sit down and be quiet. Now your intuition can go play. your intuition can go off and do something. If you have enough discipline, your intellect won't immediately jump in and say, oh, what am I doing? Is this real? You see, that ruins it. But that happens if you don't have good discipline. So learning the discipline of meditation is just basically to help you keep the intellect sitting down, being quiet, letting you have an experience, so that every experience you get, you don't immediately judge it and analyze it. Particularly the silly, is it real question.
Yeah.
Of course it's real. It's information. You're getting information. What you don't know is what's the source. It could be you. But the thing is, you have to have the mindset that says it doesn't matter what the source is. I'm just going to follow this information and engage it. It's important. Engage everything. So you're sitting there and you see something silly. You see a big pink rabbit, leaning up against an 8-foot tall daisy. And it seems like it, did I see that in a cartoon someplace? And if you just dismiss it, well, that's just junk. Well, see, you've missed the opportunity. You need to engage it. You need to connect with it, talk to it, become the rabbit, become the flower. What is it like to be a big pink rabbit leaning against a flower? You have to engage everything, because the system will give that to you. It's like bait on a hook. And if you are not disciplined enough to engage it without your intellect jumping in, then you're not ready.
Okay.
But if you are ready and you do engage it, just to have an experience, right? An experience with no expectation. Even if it's a silly experience, it doesn't matter. Just have an experience. And then you have to practice with just engaging and having experiences to the point that you can judge them later, but not initially. But your intellect wants to judge it initially. That's why you need the meditation to discipline your mind. Now, that's one path. That's the traditional path.
Okay.
The other path is something very new, and it's a technology that I just put out a year ago. It was just before Christmas last year, and it's called Tom's Park. And what it does is it gets rid of this problem that people have going out of body, because they have there's this sudden change. It's like, I'm here and now I'm not here, I'm there. So there's this dividing line, here's over on this side and there's on that side. And crossing that dividing line is very difficult, because people can't do it without their intellect getting engaged in that process. They just can't do it. It's the same reason some people have trouble falling asleep. When you fall asleep, you have to let go of here and just disappear. And if you keep clinging to that here and your mind keeps racing around, then you can't go to sleep. So this is like that, except you're not sleeping. You're still awake. You just need to let go of here.
So what Tom Park is? Is it like a simulation?
Tom's Park is no, it's not a simulation. It's another thing altogether different than meditation. What it does is it uses your imagination. Your imagination is one of the three ways that you can create, get information, one of the three sources of information. When you imagine something, and if you get involved, if you get connected and engaged in what you're imagining to the point that imagined thing just kind of takes on a life of its own. Let's say you start off imagining that you're talking to someone, maybe your, Uncle George, or somebody who's dead maybe now, and you're just imagining you're talking to them. If you can get into that conversation to the point that you're no longer intellectually playing all sides, I say this, now Uncle Fred says that. I didn't say Uncle Fred, just changed his name. But anyway, Uncle Fred says that, and then you say this, your intellect's playing both sides. But if you can just get into the conversation and let Uncle Fred say whatever he does, in other words, you imagine to the point that what you're imagining just takes on a life of its own. If you do that, then basically the larger consciousness system can come into that, whatever it is you're imagining, and start sending you a data stream that is exactly what it is that you're imagining, and you can't tell the difference. In other words, there is no transition. It's not like you're here or there. You can be 80% in your imagination and 20% getting a part of a data stream, or just the opposite, 80% getting a data in a data stream. You don't know. There's no way for you to tell, because the system can send you data that mirrors what it is that you were imagining exactly. So what happens is you have to get engaged with your imagination. And if you do it in Tom's Park, I've got a deal with the larger conscious system that it will come and send you a data stream. And it will let you, so all you have to do is get engaged such that the imagination is just running off on its own. So you will be out of body. Now, once you're out of body, there's lots of things in Tom's Park to do that will help you do anything paranormal that you want, like the out of body. Hook you to a data stream that's in another world rather than this daydream. Hook you into a data stream where you get this kinds of information, where you're available to get data out of the database. There's database available that's part of the consciousness system. And all of these things become available to you because I've got things in Tom's Park that help you do this, that help you teleport to where you want to teleport to, that help you remote view, that help you get health data on yourself or on others. So I have different kinds of technology built into Tom's Park to help you do all the paranormal things and to help you have a good time. Plus, I have a lot of physical things to do there, like any park. You can swim, you can lie on the beach, you can have recreation centers, you have places to walk and hike. There's lots of things you can do there. Interface with the critters, all the horses and all the animals talk. You can interact there with the physical things in order to get engaged. All your senses, there's things to smell, things to taste, food to eat. There's restaurants there. There's a lot of people there. You can build relationships. So there's lots to do to get you engaged. And once you get engaged, you just drift off into another reality frame. And
so how does it work? Is it a virtual reality, like a game? Where how does it happen?
I call it a virtual imaginality.
Okay. So it's like a game on the computer.
It's like a game on the computer, but there's lots of things to do, but there's no way to win or lose at the game. It's got nothing like that.
To be rather than to do.
Yeah. So it's a being thing. But if you read about it, it's a little thin book. It's only about 60 pages, and it's called Tom's Park. You can get it wherever you buy books. You get it from Amazon or whatever. But it's a little expensive. But it's not just a book. It's not a book to read. It's basically a training course, and it's an iterative training. If you go to Tom's Park 10 or 20 times, it'll get easier and easier and easier, and pretty soon you will be able to shift into another reality frame just because you want to. It'll be simple. So you start training rather than train through the discipline method of meditation. You're training through an imagination method, and it works very well. And the reason I created it was because in the courses I give that teach how to do paranormal things, maybe that's the course you were taking. I teach about mind-to-mind communications and getting data out of databases and all that different stuff. In those courses, there's always a set of people who are very left brain, very logical oriented people who just can't get there because they can't get their intellect to sit down and be quiet. So I made this other path that these people who have trouble can go, and they also have trouble with their imagination. But imagination is something you can build. It just takes some practice. So you may have to go through it 10 or 15 times or so, playing in the park. There's lots of things to do there. If you want to play volleyball, well, there's always a bunch of staff will come out and fill up all the other positions. So you can play volleyball if you want. If you want to go dancing, there's partners and music and things to dance. There's just lots of things to do there that are engaging.
Okay.
And eventually you learn to let your imagination run wild. You just go there, you start something, you get on your jet ski and start driving through there's a course there that for the jet ski, and you just let your imagination run as it does. And then you can go up to the very special places that are in the lodge travel agency that takes you on trips. You want to go to a spaceship? You want to
Wow.
beam up to see an ET? You can beam up to see an ET. You want to go backwards or forwards in time? You can do that. So there's a lot of stuff there that you can do, and you'll find out what all this stuff is by reading the book. So it's really a training course for developing your intuitive side. And what's good about developing your intuitive side is that, we spend our lives developing our intellects. That's what we're doing when we start kindergarten. We start memorizing things and we start developing our intellects, but we don't spend any time developing our intuition. So our intuition is ratty just because we never develop it. But when you do take the time to develop your intuition, you find out that it is just as accurate and just as reliable, and I say that just because otherwise people wouldn't believe me, just as accurate and just as reliable as your intellect. But the fact is, it's more accurate and more reliable than your intellect. It's a very reliable, something you can depend on. When you don't develop it, it's ratty and hit and miss, and because you're mixing your intellect with your intuition, and it all gets mixed up, and you're just guessing. Your intellect's guessing. It's not really your intuition at all. It's your intellect guessing. But that intuitive space is a space that's really not that hard to get into. For instance, you read a really interesting book, you drop the data stream that defines this reality, and you pick up a new data stream that's defined by the text in your book.
True.
You're not paying, or a movie. You're not paying attention to what's around you. All the things going around you, the other people, the other things, the noises, you don't pay any attention to that. You're reading a really good book. People can be walking back and forth, behind you, and you don't know they're there. You're absorbed. So what you've done is let go of this data stream, but you've picked up the data stream defined by the book. Now, so see, it's not hard when you, an intuitive thing, when you touch type, you type on a keyboard, you learn, you don't say, oh, here's the T key, all right, now where's the other one? You don't hunt and peck. Your fingers just know where to go. How do they know where to go? Well, it's because you've now been able to type through the intuitive space, right? And it's not that hard. You don't have to meditate before you type. Oh, let me get into a good meditation state so I can type, and so my fingers will know where to go. What do? You just shift. You just immediately shift into that intuitive space, and it's very natural. Well, going out of body eventually gets just like that.
Does it mean that artificial intelligence being developed right now that is assumingly ready to make choices that are not programmed, but developed within the mind of artificial being, does it mean that they have consciousness as well?
Not necessarily, but maybe. The way we will get a conscious computer isn't that we will just somehow build consciousness, because you can't build consciousness. Consciousness is non-physical. It's not a physical thing. So you can't take physical things and build non-physical things out of physical things. That's just logically doesn't work. So what happens is that you can make an avatar that has a decision space. And if that decision space is something that would help consciousness evolve, then the larger consciousness system will log on to that and play that part, just like it does with us. Okay, so here we evolved out of biology, we ended up with a decision space to make choices. So a consciousness logs on and makes our choices. We have a computer, and if that computer has two things, and that's, remember, consciousness is awareness with a choice. So if that computer has free will, choices that it can make, and that's not hard. Creating free will with a computer is an easy thing to do. We do that often. That just means that the computer has choices that it can make. And we do that with things called neural nets. If you have a neural net, you can program it such that the computer learns. Through its experience, it decides what kind of choices it's going to make. So neural nets then have free will, particularly a very complex neural net that is so complex that it no longer has a direct line of because of this, then this, because of that, then that. It kind of loses. Nobody knows why it makes the choices it does. It just makes those choices because that's what its internal things have come to decide to do. So that's free will. But what's more difficult is awareness. So it has to be able to be aware. So now when you have something that has an ability to make meaningful choices, and it can do that with a neural net that gives it free will, then it's a matter of whether the consciousness system thinks that's an avatar worth logging onto. Because you see,
interesting, yeah.
You see, this is a virtual reality. You're making your computer is part of this virtual reality. Your computer is just information, just like your body is information that's being computed in a virtual reality. So when the computer says, "Oh, that silicon-based system there can make really interesting choices. I'll have a piece of consciousness log on and make those choices for it." Now you have a conscious computer, just like you have a conscious human being. A conscious human being is just a carbon and hydrogen-based avatar that has has an interesting decision space. So a piece of consciousness logs on and makes its choices. Well, what's the difference between a hydrocarbon-based avatar and a silicon-based avatar? There's no difference as far as the system's concerned. If it makes interesting choices, then it'll probably pick something to log on to make those choices. Now, it will be conscious. And now if you take that conscious computer, which has a piece of consciousness that's making its choices, if you pull the plug or destroy it, well, what happens? Same as it does with us. Consciousness, moves off back into consciousness, and it may, if there's more of those computers built later, it may reconnect. So that means that computer has a soul, if you want to call that consciousness a soul, that can't be destroyed, because consciousness is not physical. You can't destroy it by blowing it up or whatever, just like you can destroy the avatar, but you don't destroy the consciousness.
So that means that if we die, our consciousness is not destroyed.
Right.
We lose the avatar, the body, and then we log back to the big consciousness system source, and then what? We reincarnate. We choose to do the same thing as we did, or we choose to participate in other realities.
Okay, let's go around with that. We'll take the life-death cycle and kind of explain it. These individuated units of consciousness, that's a IUOC, individuated unit of consciousness. That's like you and I, okay? Now, that's a subset of the larger system. Now, that individuated unit of consciousness will take a piece of itself, partition it off. I call that a free will awareness unit. It's just a subset of the individuated unit of consciousness, and that free will awareness unit is what's really logged on to the avatar.
So there is big consciousness, and there is individuated piece of consciousness, and then there is
a free will awareness unit.
Okay.
So they have these three different levels. Each is a subset of the other. Larger consciousness system is the main thing. That's the big thing. A subset of that is the IUOC, and a subset of the IUOC is the free will awareness unit. Now, that free will awareness unit logs on, and that free will awareness unit takes with it just the quality of consciousness. That means how low an entropy that consciousness has become. I call that the quality of consciousness. It takes the quality of consciousness of the IUOC with it. So as that consciousness evolves, okay, its entropy lowers, its quality goes up, and when it dies, that doesn't go back to where it was. Otherwise there'd be no progress. You couldn't
Yeah,
evolve.
yeah.
Evolution has to be, it has to keep affecting itself. So it takes that, and that's all it takes. It doesn't take memory. It doesn't take history. It just takes the quality of the individuated unit of consciousness, and that logs on. So as far as that free will awareness unit goes, when it has its first experience, say in utero, of that new avatar, that's its first experience. So it believes that it is that avatar because all of its experiences are the experiences of the avatar. You see?
I see.
So we believe that we are a human being. We are that because all of our experiences, even from before we're born, and are that. Now, why is that? Why doesn't it bring all of its memory, say, from, well, let's go through the cycle first, and then we'll talk about memory. All right, so then we have this free will awareness unit. It plays the avatar. Avatar goes old. Avatar dies. As the avatar dies, that partition between the free will awareness unit and the individuated unit of consciousness starts to be taken down. They're no longer two separate things. There's not a partition between them. They reintegrate. And the individuated unit of consciousness has done this many times. So it's the accumulator of all the various lifetimes.
So when we are there, when we lost the avatar and we connected back to the individuated unit of consciousness, does it mean that now we recollect all the information or memory about all the past lifetimes?
Well, here's sort of. Think of it this way. The free will awareness unit doesn't persist. You might think it dies, but it's a matter of the partition's just taken down. So now that part of the IUOC just is the IUOC again. So nothing really dies or goes away. It's just that this subset no longer exists. So that subset is Tom Campbell. Tom Campbell then dies. That subset disappears, but the consciousness continues. That the IUOC continues now. So immediately the awareness starts to change. You wouldn't have an awareness that would go wham, from one thing to another. That would be a jolt to the system. So it takes, it slows down a little bit. So it's like this. When you die, when you first die, you become aware that you still exist. Okay? Now, aware that you still exist, but you're not really sure what or how or where you don't have any context anymore in which to define your reality. Okay. So what happens then is there's a transition reality. It's another virtual reality that's created just for this transition to take place in. So you are at the very beginning are aware of the past life. Oh, I just died. Maybe it's an automobile accident and suddenly you died and you've got 3 infants in the car that were your babies and you're thinking, oh, what about them and what happened to them? And so you immediately have that, but it begins to fade, just like dreams fade. Oh. When you're in a dream, you're also in a different virtual reality. The dream reality is a different virtual reality. So your life that you just lived begins to fade. At first, it's right up there in your face and you're aware of it all, but then not so much. And then a little longer, not so much. And just like your dreams, when you wake up from a dream, particularly something that really was an outstanding dream, something that was a big deal dream, then immediately everything's perfectly clear, but even 10 or 20 seconds go by and it gets fuzzy. And 2 or 3 minutes go by, it gets fuzzier. And by an hour or so, you still maybe have the major parts of it. And then it kind of dissipates and you think about it a week later.
That's so sad.
Well, it's not sad, actually. Let's look at the whole system now. So that goes away. Now, you become more and more aware of yourself as part of the IUOC. Okay, because you really have been the individual unit of consciousness all along. So now you look at that lifetime. The reason that you're here is to evolve. That's your point of being here. That's why you logged on. So now you look at that and say, well, okay, in the last 10 lifetimes, I've had really trouble with anger management. I just get angry and it causes me to do all kinds of things. I need to work on that. So you think about it a little bit. If you like, you can have a life. You can go through look through some of your past lives and see. So immediately,
So you have access to this databases of your past lives
you have
in your
it.
transitional reality.
Yes. So that IUOC has all the information from all the lives all the time. The free will awareness unit doesn't, because that would be just too confusing. To have all of that information all the time would be an overload. Here you would be, with 10,000, wives and families and, 50,000 children that were all meant, so much to you. And, it's just too much. You can't do that. Besides, you want a clean start. You don't want to be stuck in the same traps that you were stuck in before. So you want to let all that go and start over where your reactions are just you reacting according to your quality, because that's a better way to do it. So in the beginning, as soon as you die, you find yourself in a transition reality. That transition reality is really just a place to let you let go. So there's not much going on there. There's processes. You may be told to go stand in a line and process in or this or that, but it's just stuff to do to give you a chance to let go of the previous thing and to start to realize that now you are something else. And then eventually you'll say, well, I need to do something, I need to learn, I need to grow. And
I need to deal with this anger.
You may, let's say you're in the beginning parts of this process or even the middle parts. And somebody says, well, okay, now, what do you want to do next? And you may say, well, I don't want to do anything next. And they'd say, that's okay. You always have free will. You don't have to do anything. But you may say, well, yeah, okay, I'm going to have another lifetime, another go. But, boy, I want to have something different because, the only reason that I didn't do really well was because of such and such, And you may then do a life review. And they may say, well, let's see about that. And you go back and you realize that it wasn't your environment that created your problems. It was you that created your problems. And you have control. You have choices. You have the free will choice. You don't have to succumb to, the programming that's pushed on you. You can outgrow that. You can rise above it. So anyway, you get aware of that. Then you say, okay, I'm ready to go again. And the system can come up with something and says, well, how about this? And because you really don't know a whole lot about whether that's good or not, you generally say, well, okay. But you can always say no. No, listen, I was poor last time. I'm going to be rich this time because that was my problem. Well, then that's the way you want to do it.
So you can choose.
Yeah, you have some choices involved.
Okay.
Now, in general, when you are in the beginning of this process of evolving the quality of your consciousness, you just jump in, jump out because you just need experience. You need to be everything. You need to be rich and poor and male and female and different races and different situations. And because the more experience you have that's different, the faster you're going to grow. Diversity is wonderful. Diversity is a wonderful thing because you'll grow more with diversity than you will with just doing the same old thing. So,
of course.
So that's kind of the way it works. So you will do this in the beginning, hop in, hop out, hop in, hop out to get experience. Eventually, after you've had some experience, now you've got some rough edges. Oh, this is a problem, like anger management, I need to deal with that. So you might want something special, or you may be convinced the only reason you had anger management problems was because you were poor. And in order to show you that that's not the truth, maybe the next time you'll be rich and you'll still have anger management problems because being poor wasn't the point. It was you that had to grow up. So anyway, so it's like that. Then you have a little more control. The more you go through it, the more input you have to it. And eventually, if you've been through it many, 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 many times and you've grown up pretty well, you may even have a life that's pretty scripted. Now you're going to come maybe into this reality with a mission.
Mm-hmm.
Here's the kind of things that you need to do. This is what you're going to be working on. So
Interesting.
it just depends on where you are in the process. But the way to look at this isn't that some people are more advanced than others. It's just we're all different. We all are wherever we happen to be, learning at the level that we need to learn at. And we're all in that same boat. So it's not that there's, higher and lower, better and worse is a wrong way to look at it. We're just different.
Yeah,
We're in different places growing up, doing the best we can with what we have for the most part. So that's kind of the way that works. So that's the cycle. So then you're back in the IUOC. The IUOC, now the reason I ended up with this reincarnational concept, and I don't call it reincarnation because in my model I try to avoid all connections with religion or with other ideas. So I just call it different experience packets. You get a different experience packet. The different experience packets are absolutely necessary. I didn't put them in there because I thought that was a neat idea or it's something I believed. They were logically necessary. And they're logically necessary because learning, evolving, is an iterative process. You can't, and you can't learn B before you've been to A and learned A. You can't learn C until you've learned B. It's not like, you have to go through the stages. It's a linear kind of process. You got to learn basic things first, and then you learn more complex things afterwards. You can't learn calculus until you've been through algebra. You can't learn algebra until you've been through arithmetic. So it's like that. So you changing who you are, getting rid of your fear. This is what you're trying to do. Getting rid of your fear, become love. That's a hard thing to do. It changes who you are. You have to see the world differently. You have to become different. Not a simple thing. It's not an intellectual thing. It's not that you got to see it intellectually. That will make you a better actor. You can act kind, but that's different than being kind. Very different. So you actually have to be kind. That's what makes you evolve the quality of your consciousness. Acting kind is more civilized and everybody around you appreciates it, but you're not evolving by acting. You have to be. So it's something that takes a lot of experience, a lot of different kinds of experience, lots of diversity before you change who you are and actually begin to grow up and become less self-centered. So the multiple experience packets becomes a necessary part of the overall model. Without that, you'd be stuck. You couldn't evolve. So so then you have this experience packet after experience packet, and no, you don't always, you don't hardly ever, incarnate with the same people all the time. It's not like that, and you said, oh, that's a shame. That's so sad. My children that I love so much, and my parents and my husband, and, I just leave all that behind. But if you didn't leave that behind and you kept just those people kept going around, you'd start limiting your experience base. You'd be doing the same things with the same people over and over again. That's an inferior, process as far as learning. You're much better off to get thrown into a new situation and you just interact according to the quality that you've earned to this point.
We are moving towards the end, and it was such an amazing conversation. I just can't get enough of you. Just 2 points to close on the altered reality states. First, I think I've read it somewhere in your book. Are you able to be in 2 realities in the same time? So let's say be here talking to me and at the same time wandering in the intuitive space. And second, what's your view, maybe briefly, on psychedelics as a means to create altered consciousness state? Is it mere hallucination, or there is something to it from your big toe theory perspective?
Okay, well, let's do the first one first. Can you be in 2 spaces at once? Yes, you can be in 3 spaces at once, and I do 4. 5 is really hard for me, and that's.
Are you somewhere else now too?
No, I'm mostly just here. But
Okay.
I could be. It depends on how much of my processing power I need to
Mm-hmm.
focus on something. So if I want
Mm-hmm.
to focus it well, like I do now,
Mm-hmm.
I want to, give you my attention, my full
Mm-hmm.
attention, then I'm here 100%. But I'm not always here at 100%. Sometimes I'm partly other places. And I come and go so quickly that it's almost hard to say. Like if you ask me a question and I'm looking for the best way to explain it to you, I may go outside to get that explanation and come
Mm.
back and give it to you. And I'm coming and going. So yes, you can be in multiple realities
Okay.
at one time,
Fascinating.
but
Exciting.
it works in a sense that there's the pie is only so big. And if I'm 10% someplace else, then I can't be but 90% here.
Attention only has 100% capacity, and then it
Yeah,
just depends on how it's distributed.
right, exactly.
Mm-hmm. That makes sense. And what about psychedelics?
Psychedelics, they do put you into a real reality. It's not that it's just a fake thing that has stimulating nerve endings and doesn't mean anything.
Mm-hmm.
It's not that. People can pass it off as being entirely imaginary and nothing happens there that has any significance. That's not true. It does put you into the larger system. But the data that you get in that larger system, you don't know how to interpret it. You don't know what it means. You have no control over the communication. So it's almost like if you were, if we get it down to an audio experience rather than most people have visual experience, but they have audio experiences too. But let's say that you were thrown into a room that had 10 different radios playing on 10 different stations at the same time.
Mm-hmm.
Well, yeah, it's real. It's all radio, and they're all real radio stations. It's not like you've just manufactured that, but it's garbage. It's hard to deal with it. There's so much, and you can't. And those radio stations come and go. This one disappears, another one comes. So the problem is that you don't have the control is not the word, but you don't have the experience to understand what it means, why it's like that. Why am I getting all these pretty colors? What do they mean? What's the significance of the pretty colors? Why is that what I get? Well, you can get messages from the larger conscious system while you're in a drug state. And some people may eventually learn how to pick them up. That's what the indigenous people did. They took drugs and it helped them become the wolf and run through the woods or fly like the eagle. And they used that. What they were doing was getting into the database and flying like an eagle. You can become a wolf or an eagle, either one, and experience what that other consciousness experiences. All these things are available to you. But again, they had the same problem, breaking that barrier. So they used drugs to break that barrier. But they used them in a very ritual way, in a very precise way. It wasn't like, let's take them and see what happens.
Yeah.
It wasn't that. It wasn't recreational drugs. It was drugs for a purpose. Certain kinds of drugs at just certain kinds of amounts that would help them do what they needed to do. And in that way, over thousands of years, they developed what drugs, what amounts, when to do the things they wanted to do. So they found them helpful.
If used properly and with right intent, then it can basically help to break this intellectual barrier to the intuitive state.
Yes. Now, to make, to enlarge on that point a little bit, is that the shaman who were taking these drugs to, fly like the eagle or see what the eagle sees, they didn't have to. They could have done it just with their intent, but they didn't know how. They were stuck in the same place that many people are stuck in as far as out of bodies and other things. They had intellects. They couldn't get their intellects to be quiet and so on. And they learned that they didn't have to be so disciplined, or they didn't have to do all the work if they took the drug in consonance with using their intent and doing what they had to do. Now, they could have, if they had known how, dispensed with all of that. The drugs are entirely unnecessary. You don't have to take drugs to be able to see what an eagle sees, or run with the wolf, or even be a wolf. You can do all that very easily without drugs. And when you do it without drugs, you're aware of what you're doing, why you're doing it, how you're doing it, the limitations, the other things you can do. Because many of the shaman also had a lot of beliefs around what they did, and they were constrained by those beliefs. So let's say that they became a wolf and they were running through the underbrush, and now they wanted to be able to see where their enemy was, but they couldn't just change into an eagle because they believed that that wasn't possible. Now, I'm just making all this up. I'm just saying that, they have things like this, because when you come to this knowledge using drugs or using any other kind of devices and not using knowledge, then there's a lot of things you don't understand. So you end up making up beliefs and making up theories and things. And if they believe that a wolf can't just change into an eagle, well, they would have to go back, get maybe a different drug, or start off and become just the eagle and let the wolf go. They had no idea that the wolf can just turn into an eagle. If you use the drug rather than learn how to do it without the drug, you're going to bring along lots of ignorance with it, lots of limitations that you don't know that you have. Things will happen and you're just out of control. They happen because that's part of the ritual as they happen, and you don't have a lot of control over it. So people get into these drugs and they see pretty lights and they see things, and maybe they get information. It's very helpful and very useful, but then they also get some kind of monster, some kind of negative thing, and they get this negative energy about, if you need to do this, or I'm going to get you, and they get all kinds of other things, which, see, that would be their fear talking. But they don't realize it's their fear talking. They think it's actually what it looks like, which is some other kind of negative being. And so it goes on and on and on. So there's lots and lots of problems with having a little bit of knowledge, but not really knowing what you're doing, And the only way to really know what you're doing is if you do it without drugs. So that's the negative side. Yes, drugs can take you into a useful space. And the only people I know of who've really, I would say drugs was a positive thing in their life, were people who tried a drug because they were curious, had a very interesting and significant experience, and never took any drugs again and decided they wanted to learn how to do it on their own so that they could have those experiences. That's the most important thing, is to know, yes, there is a little upside, but the downside is so much bigger. It's not a good idea. It leaves you with a lot of ignorance. It leaves you with a lot of things you don't understand. It leaves you with problems. It leads you into negativity often because you haven't grown out of the negativity as you go, which happens if you evolve yourself to do this. So all that negativity and that ego and that fear is still in there, which starts to manifest out into as things that happen negatively in your drug experiences. And now you have to deal with those, and that's frightening, which creates more fear, which, it tends to just go downhill in a spiral and not be a good thing. Do it without the drugs. It's just a matter of growing up. Everybody who wants to touch type probably can, but they didn't do it easily. They didn't do it the first time they tried. They spent at least 2 or 3, 4 months working and working and working at it before they got it. And you're the same way. If you understand it,
Iteration.
Yeah, iteration. You just have to keep working on it. Anything in the intuitive side, you get with iteration. You get with work. You get with repetition. If you read my Tom's Park and you go that route, you'll see there's a lot of repetition in it, but that's necessary. It's not repetition because you're not just reading a book. It's not a story. It's a training course. It's a program that you can use for the rest of your life to teach you how to develop your intuitive side. A little pricey. It costs $80, but it's $80 for a training course that lasts the rest of your life. It's really inexpensive.
Thank you, Tom. I can't even possibly explain how happy I am that we had this conversation. I really, really appreciate your time and effort. Really, really do. Before we close, what would be your suggestion for resources that our users can discover for themselves. We already talked about Tom Spark. We've mentioned the books trilogy, My Big Toe. We have mentioned the audio course that you have to help induce the deep meditation state through the sound beats in the app.
Mm-hmm.
Anything else that you would like to suggest, and also maybe anything else that you would like to share with our listeners as a conclusion of this conversation?
Well, okay, let me do the kind of the ads first, right? And then we'll talk about the conclusion. Yeah, you can go to my website, which is www.my-big-toe.com. And from there, you can probably find links to most every place else. There's a www.mbt-events, which basically says where I'm going to be talking and, places I'm going, things I'm doing, courses they're giving. There you can find out about a healing group that meets every couple of weeks. It's a really outstanding group. Several hundred people come together, and they've been very powerful and doing some amazing things. So you don't have to have any experience for any of these. You just come and you can learn and participate. Your consciousness, you don't have to learn this stuff. You're already out of your body. You're a piece of consciousness. All you have to do is learn how to get into your mind. And you're your own worst enemy there. The things that keep you out of getting into your own mind are just your beliefs and your ego and your fear and your lack of trying, lack of event. It's easy to do once you decide that it's, that you want to do it. So there's that. There's the Tom's Park that we mentioned, which is maybe a simpler way to go about it rather than the more difficult meditation, because meditation, to be really good at meditating, it'll probably take you a year or two just at meditating to get really good at it, where you can sit for an hour with no thoughts in your mind. That's not an easy road to hoe. You mentioned the courses. I have courses to teach you it's not only out of body, but it's just all about all the paranormal stuff, how to do all those kinds of things. And they're not too expensive. You can get those. They're digital audio, I think, is the best way to go there. And you can find that out at MBT events or at my site, probably take you to that kind of thing. So, of course, there's the books. The books, a trilogy, about almost 900 pages. So it's a lot. And they are logical. People who are right-brained and more intuitive sometimes struggle with them. They're not an easy read, but I try to have some fun. I crack jokes a lot as I go because you have to have a light heart at this. You can't force yourself to do things intuitive. If you approach that typewriter and say, well, damn it, typewriter, I'm going to learn to do this, that won't help. That'll just make it harder. You just have to relax and let it go and keep practicing and iterate, until eventually you start to get it a little and get it a little more. And that's the way it is when you work on the intuitive side. And to be able to get into that and stay there and not just keep popping in and out all the time just takes practice. That's all. So it just takes practice. But now, so all of those things are available. And if you get on the net and Google things, you'll get all kinds of other sorts. My work is not the only work worth looking at. You look at all the work out there, and if something particularly resonates with you, then use that. If my work doesn't resonate with you, then don't use that. Go someplace else where it does resonate with you. You have to connect to it. It has to mean something to you. You have to say, this sounds right to me. This resonates. This rings a bell in my mind. And if it does that, then it's good. You should use it and you should pursue it. But again, if it's not your experience, it can't be your truth. So go learn, practice, work at it, scour the net, find out what's best for you to do. And you'll find that a lot of it's all leading in the same direction. And if you get to some work that you might think is going to be helpful, look at the big picture of it and say, where is it leading? Where is it taking me? Is this a good place? Am I learning how to be kinder and gentler, more caring? Is it helping me, or am I just trying to manipulate my environment better to make sure that I get the things I want? Well, if it's serving your ego, it's not going to work for you in the long run. It will maybe seem really great at first, but then eventually it'll crash and burn. It won't really work for you. The only thing that really works, and the only way to get the system to help you, and the system will help you. I guess it's another thing I should say. The larger conscious system wants you to succeed, wants you to grow up, wants you to lower your entropy and have a higher quality consciousness, because as you do, it does, because you're it. It's you. Mm-hmm. So you can get help from the system. It can give you hints. It can tell you methods. It can take you out of body, send you places, take you places. It can do all sorts of things to help. But you have to do it, and it has to be your choice. And don't ask the system to make your choices for you. It won't do that. So the system will help you if you're a willing student, if you're ready. You know, they have a thing that says that, you know, when the student is ready, the master will come. And that is true. So if nothing's happening, it's probably because you're not ready yet. You still have too much fear and beliefs and ego, and you need to work on that first. That's the main thing. The paranormal by itself is neither here nor there. It's not important at all. Some people gain from it because trying to succeed in doing the paranormal forces them to grow up. Because the same things that allow you to be successful in the paranormal realm and successful in the intuitive realm are the same things that help you grow up. You've got to get rid of fear. You got to get rid of ego. You got to get rid of those beliefs in order to succeed in the paranormal. So doing paranormal things will help you practice being in a larger reality. So in that way, the paranormal can help you in the process of growing up. But it depends on why you want to do the paranormal. If you want to do paranormal because it's cool, you can impress your friends, or you can go into the girls' locker room and see what's going on in there, you know, with remote viewing, you know. You can have all kinds of not so good reasons for wanting to do the paranormal. Then it won't work for you very well. And if you do work at it long enough anyway, you may get a little good at it, but, you know, it will not change your life and it'll be a waste of your time. So that's the key thing. Grow up, become love, care about other people, try to get rid of as much of your self-centeredness as you can. You know, this idea about I want to manipulate my reality so it comes out the way I want is just self-centeredness. You know, it's this is what I want. This is what I need. I need to manipulate everybody in my life so they're the way I want them. You know, all of that is just self-centeredness, and self-centeredness is basically being immature. And we all know people who are in their 50s and 60s and 70s who are still very self-centered. They never grew up. Well, don't make that you. Don't make that you. You know, you have to get rid of that self-centeredness. Children are naturally self-centered. You're born self-centered because you're all alone in this big, scary world, and you depend on other people, and it's all about you and your survival and what you know and learning, and life starts that way. It's all about you. You have to mature and outgrow that. Life then takes in other people. You learn to be considerate. You learn to care. You know, all of that's part of the growing up process. But many people learn to act like they're caring. They learn to act the rules that the society gives to them. They learn how to be polite, but they don't really grow up much at all. That's why it takes so long and so many lifetimes and so little progress, you know, that we look outside in the world and we say, wow, what dysfunction out there, all this, you know, control, power, force, you know, everywhere. And we say, gosh, if this is our evolution, we're not doing very well, but it's a slow process. But we are doing pretty well. Look at the last 500 years. We, as Homo sapien, have grown up a lot in the last 500 years, but we still have a long way to go. We're still self-centered. It's all about us. It's how can we manipulate everything to be the way we want it? Because we know best, and we're just doing it for the good of everybody else. But, you know, of course, everybody feels that way.
I think we're actually very, very self-centered, much more than we used to be 500 years ago. Tom, I really, really appreciate this conversation. It was
Keeping you
so
up too late, aren't I?
inspiring.
Keeping you up way past your
No,
bedtime.
it's
Yeah.
no, it's never too late. I would stay another 3 hours if I could. It was very inspiring. It was very eye-opening. It was very humbling as well, and I've learned a lot. And I hope the listeners had too. Thank you so very much for your work, for your efforts in decreasing the entropy of our system by doing what you do. Thank you so much.
You're very welcome, Natalie. I've enjoyed it. You're a lovely person, and I've
Thank you.
enjoyed chatting with you.
Thank you so much.